Troy, the great citadel that commanded the strategic waterway between Europe and Asia, became the stage for the most legendary conflict in human memory. This is the complete story of the Trojan War, from the golden apple that sparked divine rivalry to the wooden horse that sealed a city's fate. A tale woven from bronze and blood, love and betrayal, where gods walked among mortals and heroes carved their names into immortal legend. If you're enjoying this journey through ancient legend, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more epic historical adventures. Beneath the layers of myth lies a real city. Troy existed long before Homer sang its glory. Archaeologists have uncovered 9 distinct settlements built one upon another. Each Troy rose from the ashes of its predecessor. The mound of Hisarlik in modern Turkey holds these ancient secrets. Heinrich Schliemann arrived here in 1870 with Homer's poems as his guide. He believed every word the ancient poet wrote. His crude excavation methods destroyed much evidence, but his passion revealed Troy's reality. Schliemann found gold masks and treasure hoards. He declared he had found Priam's Troy. Later scholars proved him wrong about the dates, yet his discoveries changed everything. Modern archaeology tells a more precise story. Troy Avdia flourished during the 13th century before Christ. This settlement shows clear signs of siege and destruction. Arrowheads litter the ruins. The city walls bear scars of ancient warfare. Storage jars were hastily buried in houses. These details paint a picture of a city under attack. The location made Troy incredibly valuable. The city controlled the narrow strait we now call the Dardanelles. Every ship passing between the Mediterranean and Black Sea had to navigate these waters. Troy could charge tolls and taxes. Merchants paid willingly rather than face the treacherous currents alone. The strait creates powerful currents and unpredictable winds. Ships often waited weeks for favourable conditions. Troy provided harbours, supplies, and pilots who knew the waters. This natural monopoly generated enormous wealth. The city's treasury grew fat on maritime commerce. Trade routes connected Troy to the wider Bronze Age world. Mycenaean pottery appears in Trojan ruins. Trojan goods travelled to Greece and beyond. The city sat at the crossroads of civilizations. East met west in Troy's bustling markets. Merchants spoke many languages in her streets. Troy's walls rose 40 feet high in places. The fortifications required massive labour and engineering skill. Only a wealthy city could afford such defences. The walls protected not just the citadel but extensive lower town areas. Archaeological surveys reveal Troy Sevener was much larger than previously thought. The city controlled rich agricultural lands in the Troad Valley. Horses grazed on fertile plains that Homer describes. The region produced grain, wine, and livestock. Troy's wealth came from both trade and agriculture. This combination made her a prize worth fighting for. Evidence suggests Troy maintained diplomatic relations with the Hittite Empire. Treaties mention a city called Wilusa in the right location. The name Wilusa may derive from the same root as Ilios, Homer's name for Troy. These documents place Troy within the political networks of the Late Bronze Age. The destruction of Troy Sevener coincides with widespread upheaval across the eastern Mediterranean. This was the age of the Sea Peoples and Bronze Age collapse. Many great cities fell during this period. Troy's destruction fits the pattern of late Bronze Age warfare. The world that produced the Trojan War was vastly different from our own. Bronze Age civilizations rose like islands of complexity in seas of tribal peoples. Palace centers dominated the landscape through military might and economic control. Kings ruled from citadels that doubled as fortresses and administrative centers. Mycenaean Greece consisted of independent kingdoms centered on massive stone palaces. Pylos, Tiryns, and Mycenae itself controlled territories through networks of local lords and officials. These weren't unified states, but collections of settlements owing allegiance to a central authority. The king sat at the top of a pyramid of obligations and rewards. Warriors formed the aristocratic class in Mycenaean society. They fought from horse-drawn chariots and wore bronze armour that cost more than a farmer's annual income. Linear B tablets record their names and landholdings. These men lived for battle and the glory it brought. Honour mattered more than life itself. The Mycenaeans were accomplished seafarers and raiders. Their ships reached Egypt, Anatolia, and the western Mediterranean. They established trading posts and sometimes conquered territory outright. Archaeological evidence shows Mycenaean presence at sites across the eastern Mediterranean during the 14th and 13th centuries. Anatolia belonged to the Hittite Empire during Troy's heyday. This vast kingdom controlled most of modern Turkey and extended into Syria and Mesopotamia. The Hittites were Indo-European speakers like the Greeks, but their culture developed differently. They built their power on diplomacy as much as warfare. Hittite records preserved in cuneiform tablets mention conflicts with peoples from across the sea. Some scholars identify these sea raiders with Mycenaean Greeks. The Hittites fought defensive wars against aggressive neighbours throughout the Late Bronze Age. Their empire gradually weakened under constant pressure. The 13th century brought increasing instability to the eastern Mediterranean. Climate change may have triggered crop failures and population movements. Archaeological evidence shows destruction layers at many sites across the region. The carefully balanced world of Bronze Age kingdoms began to crumble. Sea peoples appear in Egyptian records as destroyers of cities and kingdoms. These mysterious raiders struck throughout the eastern Mediterranean around 1200 BCE. They destroyed the Hittite Empire and attacked Egypt itself. Their identity remains debated, but they clearly included displaced populations seeking new homes. Trade networks that had connected Bronze Age civilizations began to break down. The collapse was gradual but inexorable. Palace centers lost their ability to support specialist craftsmen and professional soldiers. Writing systems disappeared as administrative needs vanished. The Bronze Age world died slowly. Archaeological evidence from Greek sites shows increasing warfare during this period. Fortifications were hastily erected around previously open settlements. Weapon hordes increase in frequency. The evidence points to a time of chronic conflict and insecurity. This was the world that remembered the Trojan War. Human memory transforms events as they pass from generation to generation. The process follows predictable patterns that anthropologists observe in oral cultures worldwide. Historical details fade while emotional truths intensify. Personal conflicts become cosmic struggles between good and evil. Oral tradition served as the primary means of preserving cultural memory in Bronze Age Greece. Professional bards memorized vast repertoires of stories, songs, and genealogies. They performed at feasts and religious festivals. Their repertoire included historical events transformed into mythic narratives. Bards didn't simply memorize fixed texts like modern actors learning scripts. Each performance was a creative act that balanced traditional elements with contemporary relevance. Stories evolved to speak to new audiences while maintaining their essential structure. This flexibility allowed myths to remain vital across centuries. The collapse of Bronze Age civilization severed connections to written records. Linear B-script disappeared when the palaces fell. Oral tradition became the only link to the heroic past. Bards preserved memories of great kingdoms and mighty warriors in the only way they could. Archaeological correlations with Homeric descriptions suggest the poems preserved genuine Bronze Age memories. The catalogue of ships in the Iliad list Mycenaean sites that were abandoned by Homer's time. Details of bronze weapons and boar's tusk helmets reflect late Bronze Age warfare. The poems remember a vanished world. Geographic knowledge in the epics also points to Bronze Age origins. Homer describes the Troad with remarkable accuracy despite writing centuries after Troy's destruction. He knew details of landscape and local customs that later poets would have had no way to learn. This knowledge travelled through oral tradition. Multiple historical conflicts likely contributed to the Trojan War tradition. Mycenaean Greeks probably did raid Anatolia repeatedly during the Late Bronze Age. Each expedition added details to the growing legend. The destruction of historical Troy provided a climactic ending that unified scattered stories. The process resembles how other cultures have created national epics from historical materials. The Song of Roland transforms Charlemagne's minor defeat in the Pyrenees into a cosmic struggle between Christianity and Islam. The Arthurian legends blend memories of post-Roman Britain with medieval fantasy. Historical kernels grow into mythic trees. Archaeological evidence supports the reality of Greek expeditions against Troy. Mycenaean pottery appears in late Bronze Age levels at the site. The destruction of Troy Severnia coincides with the period of Mycenaean expansion. Historical memory preserved in myth often contains more truth than skeptics once believed. The transformation from history to myth served important cultural functions. Epic poetry provided models of heroic behavior for aristocratic audiences. Stories of divine intervention explained otherwise inexplicable events. Myths created shared identities that transcended local tribal loyalties. Homer's Iliad and Odyssey represent only fragments of a much larger tradition. Ancient Greeks knew these poems as part of the epic cycle, a collection of works that told the complete story of the Trojan War. Most of these poems survived only in summaries preserved by later scholars. The Cypria began the cycle by narrating events leading up to the war. It told of the judgment of Paris, the abduction of Helen, and the gathering of the Greek expedition. This poem provided context that Homer's audience already knew. The Cypria filled 11 books with preliminary adventures. After the Iliad came the Aethiopis, which continued the story of the war's final year. It introduced new heroes like the Amazon Penthesilea and the Ethiopian prince Memnon. Both challenged Achilles before falling to his superior might. The poem also described Achilles' own death at the hands of Paris and Apollo. The Little Iliad picked up the narrative after Achilles' funeral. It covered the contest for his armor between Ajax and Odysseus, Ajax's subsequent madness and suicide, and the theft of the Palladium from Troy. The poem built toward the war's climax while introducing the stratagem that would finally break the deadlock. The Ilipersis, or Sack of Troy, described the city's final destruction. It began with the Trojan horse's construction and ended with the division of spoils among the victorious Greeks. This poem contained some of the most violent and disturbing episodes in the entire cycle. Ancient audiences knew that victory came at a terrible moral price. The Nostoi, or returns, told of the various Greek heroes' journeys home after Troy's fall. Only Odysseus received his own epic, but the Nostoi covered Agamemnon's murder, Menelaus's wanderings, and other homecoming stories. The poem emphasized how victory in war didn't guarantee happiness in peace. Roman poets inherited and transformed the Greek tradition. Virgil's Aeneid retold the Trojan War from the loser's perspective. His hero Aeneas escaped Troy's destruction to found the Roman race in Italy. This gave Romans their own epic genealogy connecting them to the heroes of Troy. Medieval Europe rediscovered the Trojan War through Latin sources rather than Homer's Greek. Authors like Dares and Dictys claimed to be eyewitness accounts of the war. These spurious works influenced medieval romances more than authentic classical sources. Knights and ladies replaced ancient heroes in many versions. The Renaissance brought renewed interest in Homer's authentic voice. Scholars learned Greek and translated the original poems. This created tension between medieval romance traditions and classical epic. Different national literatures developed their own approaches to the Trojan material. Modern archaeology has provided new context for understanding the literary tradition. Discoveries at Troy and Mycenaean sites allow us to separate historical memory from poetic invention. This has increased rather than diminished appreciation for Homer's achievement in creating timeless art from historical materials. The Trojan War stories continue to inspire new works in every generation. Each age finds different meanings in the ancient tales. The core themes of love, war, honor, and loss speak to universal human experiences that transcend any particular historical period. The roots of Troy's destruction stretch back to the marriage of a mortal king and an immortal sea nymph. Their wedding feast would unleash forces that no power on earth could contain. Divine prophecy cast its shadow over this union from the very beginning. Thetis dwelt in the silver caves beneath the Aegean Sea. She was daughter to Nereus, the old man of the sea, and sister to 50 other sea nymphs called Nereids. Her beauty surpassed that of mortal women. Even gods desired her for their bride. But the fates had woven a terrible prophecy around her destiny. Any son born to Thetis would grow mightier than his father. This prophecy struck fear into the hearts of both Zeus and Poseidon, who had pursued the lovely nymph with passionate intensity. Neither god dared father a child who might overthrow him, as he had overthrown his own father. The cycle of divine succession that had claimed Cronus might continue. Prometheus the Titan knew this secret and revealed it to Zeus during his long torment on the mountain. The wise Titan bought his freedom with this knowledge. Zeus immediately abandoned his pursuit of Thetis. The king of gods commanded that she be given in marriage to a mortal man instead. Peleus ruled the Myrmidons in Thessaly. He was renowned among mortals for his courage and piety. The gods favoured him despite his human limitations. Zeus selected him to be Thetis' husband precisely because he was mortal. Their son might surpass Peleus, but no mortal child could threaten the gods themselves. Thetis resisted the match with all her divine power. She possessed the ability to change shapes like her father Nereus. When Peleus came to claim her, she transformed into fire, then water, then a serpent. The mortal king held fast through every transformation. His persistence finally won her grudging consent to marriage. The wedding took place on Mount Pelion, where the centaur Chiron made his home. All the gods attended this momentous celebration. Zeus himself gave the bride away. Poseidon brought gifts from the ocean's depths. The 9 muses sang wedding hymns that echoed across the mountain peaks. Hephaestus forged magnificent armour for the groom. This divine panoply would later pass to Peleus' son and make him invincible in battle. The smith god worked his finest magic into every piece. No mortal weapon could pierce these celestial defences. The marriage feast lasted for days. Nectar and ambrosia flowed freely among both mortal and immortal guests. The gods mingled with heroes in unprecedented harmony. It seemed the golden age had returned to earth. This celebration would be remembered as the last time gods and mortals feasted together in perfect peace. Yet one goddess received no invitation to this joyous gathering. Eris personified strife and discord among both gods and men. The other deities excluded her deliberately, hoping to prevent any disturbance of the wedding's harmony. This slight would prove the most costly mistake in divine history. Eris arrived uninvited at the height of the celebration. She came bearing a single golden apple inscribed with 3 simple words, "To the fairest." The goddess cast this prize among the wedding guests and vanished with malicious laughter. Her revenge was swift and perfect. 3 goddesses immediately claimed the apple. Hera, queen of the gods and Zeus's wife, considered herself the most beautiful of all divine beings. Athena, virgin goddess of wisdom and war, possessed a beauty enhanced by intelligence and power. Aphrodite, goddess of love itself, embodied physical perfection that made mortals forget themselves entirely. The wedding feast dissolved into bitter argument. Each goddess marshalled supporters and evidence for her superior beauty. The celebration turned into a contest that threatened to divide Olympus itself. Eris watched from afar, delighting in the chaos her simple gift had caused. Zeus recognized the trap immediately. He could not judge between his wife, his daughter, and his kinswoman without creating eternal enemies. Any choice would shatter the peace of Olympus. The king of gods needed someone else to make this impossible decision. He would find a mortal judge who could bear the consequences of choosing. The wedding of Peleus and Thetis thus became the beginning of Troy's doom. From divine love and mortal ambition came the seeds of the greatest war in human memory. The golden apple would roll down through history, gathering momentum until it crushed the walls of the mightiest city in the world. The 3 goddesses carried their rivalry from Olympus to the earth below. They demanded a judge who could settle their dispute over the golden apple. Zeus knew that any choice would create enemies, so he sought a mortal who could bear divine wrath. His messenger Hermes would guide them to Mount Ida, where a shepherd boy tended his flocks. Paris had been born a prince of Troy, son to King Priam and Queen Hecuba. But evil omens surrounded his birth. Hecuba dreamed she gave birth to a flaming torch that consumed the city. Prophets declared the child would bring ruin to Troy. Priam commanded that the infant be exposed on Mount Ida to die. The king's servant could not bring himself to murder an innocent baby. He left Paris on the mountainside, but returned secretly to feed him. A she-bear nursed the abandoned prince until shepherds found him. They raised him as their own son, never knowing his royal blood. Paris grew to magnificent manhood among the mountain shepherds. His beauty rivaled that of the gods themselves. He possessed strength, grace, and wisdom beyond his humble station. The youth excelled at all the contests that shepherds loved. His peers called him Alexander, meaning defender of men, for his courage in protecting the flocks from wild beasts. Hermes descended to Mount Ida with his divine charges. The three goddesses appeared before the startled shepherd with all their immortal glory blazing. They explained their dispute and commanded him to judge their beauty. Each goddess would offer bribes to influence his decision. Hera spoke first with all the majesty of Zeus's queen. She promised to make Paris lord of all Asia if he chose her. Vast kingdoms would bow before his throne. Countless subjects would serve his every whim. Power beyond mortal dreams could be his reward for recognizing her supreme beauty. Athena followed with wisdom's tempting voice. She offered victory in every battle if Paris named her fairest. No enemy could stand against him in war. Strategic genius would guide his every decision. He would become the greatest military commander in human history, winning fame that would echo through eternity. Aphrodite came last with honeyed words that stirred the young man's heart. She promised him the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. Helen of Sparta would become his bride, bringing him greater joy than all the kingdoms or victories the other goddesses offered. Love would make him truly rich. Paris considered each offer with the weight of destiny upon his shoulders. Kingdoms held little appeal for a shepherd who loved the mountain freedom. Military glory meant nothing to one who had never known the thrill of battle. But love spoke to his young heart with irresistible power. The shepherd prince awarded the golden apple to Aphrodite. Love conquered ambition and the desire for glory. Helen's beauty, which he had never seen but somehow knew, surpassed all mortal women, became his chosen prize. The goddess of love smiled with triumph while her rivals departed in cold fury. Hera and Athena would never forgive this slight to their beauty and power. They swore eternal enmity against Paris and all his people. Troy would face their combined wrath for this shepherd's choice. The judgment that seemed to favour love would ultimately bring destruction to countless innocent lives. Aphrodite kept her promise with divine swiftness. She revealed Paris's true identity to the royal family of Troy. Athletic contests were being held in the city, and the disguised prince participated with stunning success. His victories in every event amazed the crowd and caught the attention of his sister Cassandra. The prophetess recognized her brother despite his long absence. Her gift of foresight showed her the disaster his return would bring. She warned Priam and Hecuba that this was the child prophesied to destroy Troy. But her curse meant that no one believed her true predictions. Priam's joy at recovering his lost son overcame prophetic warnings. He welcomed Paris back to the royal palace, with celebrations that lasted for days. The king refused to consider that this beautiful young man could threaten their mighty city. Love blinded the father to his son's dangerous destiny. Paris embraced his royal heritage with enthusiasm. He quickly learned the manners and skills expected of a Trojan prince. His natural grace and intelligence impressed everyone at court. Soon he was leading diplomatic missions to neighbouring kingdoms, representing Troy's interests abroad. The goddess Aphrodite whispered constantly in his ear about Helen's beauty. She described the Spartan queen in terms that inflamed his imagination. Every night brought dreams of the woman he had been promised. His desire grew beyond all reasonable bounds until it consumed his thoughts entirely. When the opportunity came to lead a diplomatic mission to Sparta, Paris volunteered eagerly. He told his father the mission would strengthen ties between their kingdoms. Priam approved the embassy, unaware that his son intended seduction rather than diplomacy. The judgment on Mount Ida was about to bear its bitter fruit. The kings who would lead Greece against Troy carried their own divine curse. The house of Atreus bore guilt that stretched back through generations of sin and punishment. Blood called for blood in an endless cycle that no mortal power could break. Tantalus began the curse through his monstrous crime against the gods. This king was blessed above all mortals, invited to feast at the table of Zeus himself. He dined on nectar and ambrosia with the immortals. No human being had ever received such honour, yet pride corrupted his heart and made him forget his place. Tantalus decided to test the gods' wisdom with a horrific experiment. He murdered his own son Pelops and served the child's flesh at a divine banquet. The king wanted to see if omniscient gods could distinguish human meat from other food. His act combined filicide with the ultimate blasphemy. The gods recognized the crime immediately. Only Demeter, distracted by grief for her daughter Persephone, accidentally consumed part of Pelops's shoulder. The other immortals recoiled in horror from Tantalus's offering. Divine justice demanded swift and terrible punishment. Zeus restored Pelops to life with a shoulder of ivory to replace what Demeter had eaten. The boy returned more beautiful than before, blessed with divine favour that would make him a great king. But his father faced eternal torment in the underworld. Tantalus would forever reach for fruit that pulled away, and water that receded from his lips. Pelops grew to manhood seeking a bride worthy of his restored life. He desired Hippodamia, daughter of King Oenomaus of Pisa, but her father challenged all suitors to a chariot race. Winners could marry the princess. Losers died by the king's spear. 13 young men had already perished in these contests. Oenomaus possessed divine horses given by his father Ares. No mortal steeds could match their speed. The king also carried a spear that never missed its target. He seemed invincible in these deadly races. Some whispered that he loved his daughter with unnatural passion and killed her suitors from jealousy. Pelops called upon Poseidon, who had loved him during his youth. The sea god provided winged horses and a golden chariot that could fly above the earth. But Pelops also used trickery to ensure victory. He bribed Oenomaus's charioteer Myrtilus to sabotage the king's chariot wheels. The race proceeded as planned until the sabotaged wheels collapsed. Oenomaus died tangled in his reins, dragged to death by his own divine horses. Pelops won Hippodamia and the kingdom of Pisa, but Myrtilus demanded the promised reward, a night with the bride before her wedding. Pelops refused to honour his agreement with the charioteer. Instead, he threw Myrtilus from a cliff into the sea during their victory celebration. The dying man cursed Pelops and all his descendants. Divine vengeance would pursue the house through every generation. Pelops established the Olympic Games to honour Zeus and expiate his guilt. These contests brought glory to Greece for centuries, but the curse could not be lifted by athletic competitions or religious ceremonies. Sin had entered the bloodline and would not depart until justice was satisfied. 2 sons were born to Pelops and Hippodamia, Atreus and Thyestes. The brothers inherited their grandfather's pride and their father's capacity for treachery. Their rivalry began in childhood and grew more venomous with each passing year. Both desired to rule their father's kingdom. The throne of Mycenae fell vacant, and its people consulted oracles about choosing a new king. The gods declared that a son of Pelops should rule them. But which brother deserved the crown? The Mycenaeans decided that whoever possessed the golden fleece should become their king. Atreus discovered the golden fleece in his own flocks and assumed the throne, but Thyestes had seduced his brother's wife and convinced her to steal the fleece. When Thyestes produced the golden ram's hide, the people acclaimed him king instead. Atreus fled into exile, burning with desire for revenge. Zeus sent signs favouring Atreus over his adulterous brother. The sun reversed its course in the sky, demonstrating divine displeasure with Thyestes' rule. The people recognized these omens and restored Atreus to his rightful throne, But the wronged king planned a revenge that would surpass all previous crimes. Atreus pretended to forgive his brother and invited him to a reconciliation feast. He murdered Thyestes' 3 young sons and served their flesh at the banquet. Only after his brother had eaten did Atreus reveal the horrific truth. The curse of Tantalus repeated itself in a new generation. Thyestes fled, cursing his brother and all his descendants. The oracle told him that only a son born of his own daughter could avenge this crime. Thyestes raped his daughter Pelopia, who bore a son named Aegisthus. This child would grow up to fulfill the curse by murdering Atreus' son Agamemnon. The gods themselves took sides in the approaching conflict between Greeks and Trojans. Old rivalries and new grievances divided Olympus into opposing camps. Mortals would fight their war, but immortal powers would shape its course according to their own desires and hatreds. Aphrodite naturally supported the Trojans because Paris had honoured her with the golden apple. She felt personal responsibility for protecting the shepherd prince who had chosen love over power. The goddess would shield Troy's walls and guide their weapons in battle. Her favour made the Trojans formidable opponents. Apollo joined the Trojan cause for different reasons. The god of music and prophecy loved civilization and culture above raw military might. Troy represented artistic achievement and refined living. The city's poets and musicians honoured him with beautiful temples and regular sacrifices. Apollo could not bear to see such culture destroyed by Greek barbarism. Ares, god of war itself, also favoured the Trojans. His support seemed contradictory since Greeks were equally warlike. But Ares preferred defensive warfare that protected homes and families over aggressive campaigns of conquest. The Trojans fought to preserve their city while Greeks fought for plunder and glory. Honour lay with the defenders. Hera led the pro-Greek faction with implacable fury. Paris had insulted her by choosing Aphrodite as the fairest goddess. This slight could never be forgiven or forgotten. She would see Troy reduced to smoking ruins before her anger cooled. The Queen of Gods possessed power to make her hatred reality. Athena shared her stepmother's rage against Paris and his people. The virgin goddess prided herself on wisdom and strategic thinking. Paris had foolishly rejected her offer of military victory in favour of Aphrodite's sensual pleasures. Such poor judgment deserved the harshest punishment. Athens would guide Greek spears to Trojan hearts. Poseidon remembered ancient grievances against Troy's royal family. King Laomedon had cheated the sea god of promised payment for building the city's walls. This insult demanded vengeance that could only be satisfied by Troy's complete destruction. Poseidon would shake the earth beneath the city and drown her defenders in blood. Zeus attempted to remain neutral in the growing conflict. The king of gods understood that excessive divine intervention would rob mortals of their heroic agency. Men must win their own glory through courage and skill. But his efforts at neutrality pleased no one and satisfied nothing. The goddesses who supported each side constantly pressured Zeus to favour their cause. Hera used every weapon in her considerable arsenal of persuasion. She reminded him of her loyalty as his wife and queen. She threatened to withdraw her support for his rule. She even seduced him with supernatural beauty to cloud his judgment. Thetis also influenced divine politics through her relationship with Zeus. The sea nymph had once saved the king of gods from rebellion by the other Olympians. Zeus owed her a debt that could not be repaid. When her son Achilles needed divine favour, Thetis would collect on this ancient obligation. Divine favoritism created moral complexity that troubled even the gods themselves. Righteous causes became mixed with personal vendettas. Justice served the interests of the strongest rather than the most deserving. The cosmic order itself seemed threatened by excessive divine involvement in mortal affairs. Zeus established rules to limit divine interference in the war. Gods could not fight directly against mortal heroes. They must work through inspiration, guidance, and subtle assistance rather than overwhelming power. These restrictions aim to preserve human agency while allowing divine will to manifest. But these rules proved impossible to enforce consistently. passionate gods found ways to circumvent restrictions through clever interpretation. They appeared to favoured mortals in dreams and visions. They deflected weapons at crucial moments. They sent omens and portents to guide human decisions. Divine politics continued by other means. The war became a contest between opposing divine factions as much as between Greek and Trojan armies. Mortal heroes served as champions for their patron deities. Victory or defeat in battle reflected the relative power of the gods who supported each side. Human courage mattered, but divine favour mattered more. This cosmic dimension elevated the conflict beyond ordinary warfare between kingdoms. The fate of Troy would demonstrate which divine principles should govern human civilization. Would love triumph over wisdom? Could established order defeat revolutionary change? The answers would echo through all future ages of mortal history. While gods plotted on Olympus, the woman who would launch 1,000 ships lived peacefully in Sparta. Helen possessed beauty that mortals could barely comprehend. Her face reflected divine perfection that made strong men forget their duties. She was daughter to Zeus himself, born from the union of the king of gods with mortal Leda. Zeus had come to Leda in the form of a swan, fleeing the pursuit of an eagle. The queen of Sparta sheltered the beautiful bird and was overcome by supernatural desire. From this union came 2 eggs that hatched the most famous siblings in Greek legend. Helen and her brother Polydeuces inherited divine nature from their father. Castor and Clytemnestra, born the same night to Leda's mortal husband, possessed only human gifts. Helen's beauty manifested early in childhood. Visitors to Sparta's palace would stop speaking when they saw her. Grown men forgot their words in the presence of a child whose loveliness surpassed adult women. Her foster father Tyndareus knew that such beauty would bring both blessing and curse to his household. When Helen reached marriageable age, suitors came from every corner of Greece. Kings and princes competed for her hand with increasingly extravagant gifts. The greatest heroes of the age sailed to Sparta seeking to win the world's most beautiful woman. Their rivalry threatened to tear Greece apart in civil war. Tyndareus faced an impossible dilemma. Choosing any single suitor would create dozens of enemies. The rejected princes might unite against Sparta or fight among themselves until Greece bled itself white. The king needed a solution that would satisfy honour while preventing warfare. Odysseus provided the answer that saved the situation. The clever prince of Ithaca suggested that all suitors swear a binding oath. They would promise to protect Helen's chosen husband against anyone who might harm him. This oath would make every suitor a guardian of Helen's marriage rather than a threat to it. The oath of Tyndareus bound the greatest names in Greece to Helen's protection. Agamemnon and Menelaus, the sons of Atreus, swore the sacred words. Ajax the Greater from Salamis pledged his mighty arm. Diomedes of Argos, Idomeneus of Crete, and dozens of other heroes added their voices to the binding promise. Tyndareus chose Menelaus as his daughter's husband. The younger son of Atreus had distinguished himself through courage and courtesy during the long courtship. His brother Agamemnon's support also influenced the decision. The High King of Mycenae commanded respect throughout Greece. The wedding of Helen and Menelaus became a celebration that lasted for weeks. All the great families of Greece attended the ceremony. Gifts poured into Sparta from every allied kingdom. The palace overflowed with gold, silver, and precious goods. Helen's marriage sealed alliances across the Greek world. Helen adapted quickly to her role as Queen of Sparta. She proved herself skilled in the traditional arts that noble women practiced. Her weaving surpassed all others in beauty and intricacy. She managed the palace household with grace and efficiency. Menelaus counted himself the most fortunate man alive. The royal couple seemed perfectly matched in temperament and interests. Menelaus adored his divine wife without possessiveness or jealousy. Helen appeared content with her mortal husband despite her partly divine nature. They shared interests in music, poetry, and the arts that civilized societies cherished. Helen bore Menelaus a daughter named Hermione, whose beauty promised to rival her mother's. The child brought great joy to the royal couple. Sparta prospered under their rule. The kingdom enjoyed peace and prosperity that seemed blessed by the gods themselves. Yet Helen sometimes seemed distracted, as if listening to voices only she could hear. Her divine heritage made her sensitive to currents that mortals could not detect. She would gaze eastward toward Troy with expressions that troubled her husband. Some force was calling to her across the wine-dark sea. Servants whispered that Helen spoke in her sleep of golden apples and distant princes. She would wake from dreams she could not remember clearly. These episodes became more frequent as time passed. The gods were weaving her into their plans for war. Helen's beauty remained undiminished by motherhood and the passing years. If anything, maturity enhanced her divine perfection. Visitors to Sparta still stopped speaking when they saw her. Her presence made the palace seem touched by heaven itself. The peace and happiness could not last forever. Divine prophecy had marked Helen from birth as the catalyst for great events. Her beauty was too powerful to remain hidden in Sparta. The judgment of Paris had already set forces in motion that would transform her from contented queen to the face that launched the greatest war in human history. The Trojan embassy arrived in Sparta during the spring sailing season, when diplomatic missions traditionally travelled between kingdoms. Prince Paris led the delegation with proper ceremony and magnificent gifts. His official purpose was strengthening trade relationships between Troy and Sparta. His true mission served Aphrodite's promise of love. Menelaus welcomed the Trojan prince with traditional hospitality. Greek custom demanded generous treatment of foreign guests. The king ordered feasts prepared and guest chambers furnished with the finest amenities. He personally conducted tours of Sparta's treasures and shared stories of the kingdom's heroic past. Paris impressed everyone with his grace and courtesy. The young prince possessed all the refinements expected of royal education. He spoke eloquently about Troy's ancient culture and commercial interests. His knowledge of poetry and music delighted Sparta's court. Menelaus found him an engaging companion. Helen attended the welcome ceremonies as protocol required. The moment she saw Paris, divine forces stirred in her heart. Aphrodite's power worked through the Trojan prince's beauty to awaken desires that had slumbered throughout her marriage. The goddess of love claimed her promised reward. Paris felt the same supernatural attraction when he first beheld Helen. Her beauty exceeded even Aphrodite's glowing descriptions. He understood immediately why the goddess had promised her as his prize. No other woman could compare to this divine perfection made flesh. The diplomatic mission proceeded normally for several days. Paris negotiated trade agreements and cultural exchanges with appropriate seriousness. He visited Sparta's temples and participated in religious ceremonies. His behavior gave no hint of his true intentions, but private moments told a different story. Paris and Helen found excuses to meet away from court supervision. They walked in the palace gardens during evening hours. Their conversations grew more intimate with each encounter. Aphrodite's power drew them together like iron to a lodestone. Menelaus noticed nothing unusual about his guest's behavior. The king trusted his wife completely and saw no reason for suspicion. He treated Paris as an honored friend rather than a potential rival. His generosity would make the betrayal more bitter. An urgent message summoned Menelaus to Crete for his grandfather's funeral. The king prepared to depart immediately, leaving his kingdom in Helen's capable hands. He apologized to Paris for cutting short the diplomatic visit. The Trojan prince expressed understanding while secretly rejoicing at this opportunity. The seduction began the night after Menelaus's departure. Paris came to Helen's chambers with sweet words and passionate declarations. He spoke of Aphrodite's promise and their destined love. The goddess enhanced his natural persuasive powers with supernatural charm. Whether Helen yielded willingly or suffered abduction remains debated by poets and historians. Some claim she fell genuinely in love with the handsome prince. Others insist divine compulsion overcame her mortal will. Perhaps both explanations contain truth that mortals cannot fully comprehend. Helen certainly helped Paris gather treasure from the palace before their departure. They took gold, silver, and precious objects worth a king's ransom. These riches would support them during their flight and demonstrate Paris's success to his father. The theft added insult to the injury of adultery. The lovers departed Sparta in the dark hours before dawn. They sailed in ships that Paris had prepared secretly during his stay. Helen brought only essential possessions and her most trusted servants. She left behind her daughter Hermione, who was too young for such a dangerous journey. Their flight took them through the Greek islands toward Troy. Paris avoided the main shipping routes to prevent pursuit and detection. They stopped at friendly ports where Trojan influence provided protection. Each day carried them further from Sparta and deeper into forbidden love. Helen's feelings during this journey remain mysterious. Did she rejoice in newfound passion, or mourn the life she was abandoning? Ancient sources offer conflicting testimony. Perhaps she experienced both emotions simultaneously as mortal and divine natures warred within her. The couple reached Troy after a voyage of several weeks. Priam welcomed his son's return with celebrations that lasted for days. The old king accepted Helen as his daughter-in-law, despite understanding the consequences. Her divine beauty convinced him that she was worth any price. Paris presented Helen to the Trojan court as his rightful bride. He claimed that Aphrodite herself had blessed their union. The goddess of love had given Helen to him as reward for his judgment on Mount Ida. No mortal law could override divine will. The Trojans debated whether to keep Helen or return her to prevent war. Some councillors urged sending her back to Sparta with apologies and compensation. Others argued that divine intervention made their marriage sacred. Priam supported his son despite the obvious dangers. Helen's presence transformed Troy's royal court. Her beauty enhanced every gathering and ceremony. Poets competed to celebrate her divine perfection. Artists sought to capture her likeness in painting and sculpture. The city seemed touched by heavenly grace. But wise men recognized the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Cassandra prophesied doom for Troy if Helen remained within the walls. Her warnings went unheeded as always. The die was cast, and mortal will could not alter the course of destiny. Menelaus returned from Crete expecting to find his palace filled with the warmth of Helen's presence. Instead, he discovered empty chambers and missing treasures that spoke of betrayal beyond his darkest fears. The king's world collapsed in the space of a single afternoon. Servants delivered the devastating news with trembling voices. Helen had departed in the night with the Trojan prince. They had taken ships loaded with gold and precious objects. The queen's personal chambers stood empty except for abandoned clothing and jewellery. Even her favourite hunting dogs had been left behind. The magnitude of the insult struck Menelaus like a physical blow. His wife had been stolen by a guest who had eaten at his table and enjoyed his protection. The sacred laws of hospitality had been violated in the most heinous way possible. No injury could be more shameful to a Greek king. Rage consumed Menelaus as he surveyed the stolen treasures. These weren't random objects grabbed in hasty flight. Helen and Paris had selected the most valuable items carefully. They had planned this theft with deliberate precision. The betrayal was complete and calculated. The king's first impulse was to gather his own ships and pursue the fleeing lovers. But cooler judgment prevailed after his initial fury subsided. Sparta's forces alone might not suffice to breach Troy's mighty walls. He needed allies and careful planning to recover his stolen wife. Menelaus departed immediately for Mycenae to consult his brother Agamemnon. The High King commanded greater resources and possessed political connections throughout Greece. If anyone could organize a successful expedition against Troy, it would be the son of Atreus who ruled from the Golden Citadel. Agamemnon received his brother's news with satisfaction as much as sympathy. The insult to their family honor demanded vengeance that would echo through history. But the High King also saw opportunity in this crisis. A successful war against Troy would increase his power and prestige immeasurably. Troy controlled the vital trade routes between Europe and Asia. Her wealth came from taxing ships that passed through the narrow strait. Greek merchants paid these tolls grudgingly while dreaming of free passage to eastern markets. War against Troy would serve commercial interests as well as family honor. Agamemnon's strategic mind immediately grasped the situation's possibilities. He could present this as a holy war to recover a stolen queen and punish violated hospitality. All Greece would rally to such a righteous cause. The expedition would unite the fractious Greek kingdoms under his leadership. The brothers invoked the oath of Tyndareus that bound Helen's former suitors to protect her marriage. These heroes had sworn sacred vows before gods and men. Honour demanded that they fulfill their promises regardless of personal cost. The oath gave Agamemnon legal justification for demanding military service. Messengers carried summons to every kingdom that had participated in Helen's courtship. The sons of Atreus reminded each prince of his sworn obligations. They called for ships, men, and weapons to mount the greatest expedition in Greek history. The response would test the bonds that held their civilization together. Some heroes answered the call with enthusiasm. They welcomed the chance for glory and plunder that a successful war would bring. Others hesitated, knowing that siege warfare against Troy's mighty walls could last for years. All recognized that they had no choice but to honor their oaths. Agamemnon established his headquarters at Aulis, where ships could gather safely for the long voyage east. The harbour provided anchorage for hundreds of vessels, while the surrounding plains offered space for vast military camps. From here, the expedition would launch against Troy. The king appointed himself supreme commander of the allied forces. His position as High King of Mycenae and brother to the wronged husband gave him natural authority. Most Greek leaders accepted his leadership, though some chafed at taking orders from their former equal. Preparations for war began immediately throughout Greece. Smiths worked day and night forging weapons and armour. Shipwrights constructed new vessels or repaired existing ones. Farmers prepared extra rations for the long campaign ahead. Entire kingdoms mobilized for war. The scale of preparation reflected the magnitude of the insult that demanded vengeance. This would not be a simple raid for cattle or slaves. The Greeks intended to destroy Troy completely and recover Helen with all the stolen treasure. Such an ambitious goal required unprecedented resources. The greatest challenge facing Agamemnon was gathering the heroes whose participation would ensure victory. Some legendary warriors answered his summons eagerly. Others required persuasion, trickery, or outright coercion. The king would need them all if his expedition was to succeed against Troy's mighty defences. Odysseus of Ithaca proved the most difficult to recruit. The clever king had married Penelope after losing Helen's hand to Menelaus. His island kingdom prospered under his wise rule. He had no desire to abandon his happiness for years of siege warfare. When Agamemnon's messengers arrived, Odysseus pretended to be mad. The prince of Ithaca yoked an ox and a horse together and began ploughing his fields with salt instead of seed. He acted like a man whose mind had been destroyed by the gods. His erratic behaviour convinced some observers that he truly suffered from divine madness, but others suspected deception. Palamedes accompanied the recruiting mission specifically to test Odysseus's claimed insanity. This prince was renowned for his intelligence and invention. He had created the lighthouse, scales for weighing, and dice for gaming. His clever mind immediately devised a plan to expose any deception. Palamedes placed Odysseus's infant son Telemachus directly in front of the plough. A truly mad man would continue ploughing and kill his own child. A sane man would stop to save the baby. Odysseus immediately halted the plough and swept up his son. His supposed madness vanished instantly. Exposed as a fraud, Odysseus had no choice but to join the expedition. But he resented Palamedes' cleverness in unmasking his deception. This resentment would later lead to tragic consequences when Odysseus engineered his rival's death through false accusations of treason. Achilles presented a different challenge for the recruiters. Thetis knew that her son was destined to die young if he went to Troy. The sea nymph had hidden him at the court of King Lycomedes on the island of Scyros. Disguised as a girl, Achilles lived among the king's daughters. The disguise succeeded because Achilles had not yet reached full manhood. His beardless face and graceful form allowed him to pass for a maiden. He learned feminine skills like weaving and dancing. Some sources claim he even bore a child to one of Lycomedes' daughters during this period. Odysseus discovered Achilles' hiding place through careful investigation. The Prince of Ithaca came to Syros disguised as a merchant selling jewellery and trinkets to the royal women. Hidden among the feminine goods were a spear and shield of exceptional quality. While the real maidens examined bracelets and necklaces, Achilles was drawn irresistibly to the weapons. His warrior nature could not resist touching the perfectly balanced spear. Odysseus immediately recognized the young hero despite his feminine disguise. The revelation confronted Achilles with the choice his mother had described. He could remain hidden on Syros and live a long, peaceful life in obscurity, or he could join the expedition to Troy and win eternal glory at the cost of early death. His decision would shape the course of the war. Achilles chose glory over longevity without hesitation. The hero's code demanded that he seek fame in battle rather than safety in hiding. He would rather die young as a celebrated warrior than live long as a forgotten man. His choice sealed Troy's doom. The recruitment of Ajax the Greater required no deception or persuasion. This massive warrior from Salamis answered Agamemnon's summons immediately. He brought his half-brother Teucer, the finest archer in Greece. Their island kingdom's entire military force joined the expedition. Diomedes of Argos also responded enthusiastically to the call for war. This young king had inherited his father's courage and tactical skill. He brought a substantial force from his wealthy kingdom. His participation encouraged other Argive leaders to join the expedition as well. Nestor of Pylos came despite his advanced age. This wise king had ruled for 3 generations and participated in legendary adventures. His experience and counsel would prove invaluable during the long siege. He brought his sons Antilochus and Thrasymedes as subordinate commanders. The recruitment process took months as messengers travelled throughout Greece. Some heroes required multiple visits before agreeing to participate. Others demanded specific terms for their involvement. Agamemnon had to negotiate carefully to build his coalition. Each hero brought his own followers and resources to the gathering expedition. Local kings commanded their own forces while acknowledging Agamemnon's supreme authority. This created a complex command structure that would cause problems throughout the war. The assembly at Aulis became the largest military gathering in Greek history. Over 1,000 ships filled the harbour while tens of thousands of warriors camped on the surrounding plains. Never before had so many heroes united for a common cause, Calchas. The prophet joined the expedition to provide divine guidance. His ability to read omens and interpret the god's will would prove crucial during critical moments. But his prophecies often brought unwelcome news that tested the leader's resolve. The seer's first major prophecy concerned the war's duration. He declared that Troy would not fall until the 10th year of siege. This prediction dismayed many participants who had expected a quick victory. The prospect of decade-long warfare strained everyone's commitment. Calchas also prophesied the specific conditions required for Greek victory. Certain heroes must participate in the final assault. Sacred objects must be captured from Troy's temples. The gods demanded particular sacrifices at crucial moments. These requirements would drive many future plot developments. The great expedition was nearly ready to sail against Troy. Ships crowded the harbour while warriors completed their final preparations. But the gods had one more test before allowing the fleet to depart. The sacrifice at Aulis would demonstrate the true cost of this war. The assembled Greek fleet waited at Aulis for favourable winds to carry them across the Aegean Sea. Day after day passed with the ships becalmed in the harbour. The sails hung limp while warriors grew restless and supplies dwindled. Something had angered the gods, but the cause remained mysterious. Agamemnon had committed the fatal error during a hunting expedition in Artemis's sacred grove. The High King killed a magnificent stag and boasted that even the goddess of the hunt could not have made such a perfect shot. His pride offended the virgin deity who protected all wild creatures. Artemis sent contrary winds that prevented the fleet's departure. The goddess could have destroyed the ships outright, but she preferred a subtler punishment. The Greeks would learn the price of insulting divine majesty. Their expedition would proceed only after proper atonement. Calchas, the prophet, revealed the cause of their troubles through careful study of omens and divine signs. Birds flew in patterns that spoke of Artemis's anger. Sacrificial animals showed marks that indicated the goddess's displeasure. The seer understood what price would satisfy divine justice. The prophet's announcement stunned the assembled leaders. Artemis demanded the sacrifice of Agamemnon's eldest daughter, Iphigenia. The virgin goddess required a virgin's blood to lift the curse upon the expedition. No lesser offering would suffice to restore divine favour. Agamemnon's initial response was absolute refusal. He would not murder his own child for any cause, however noble. The king prepared to abandon the expedition rather than commit such a monstrous crime. His fatherly love overcame his ambition for military glory. But the other leaders applied tremendous pressure on their supreme commander. They had invested months of preparation and enormous resources in this expedition. Thousands of warriors had answered the call to arms. All of Greece demanded vengeance for Helen's abduction. The war could not be abandoned for one man's scruples. Odysseus devised the deception that brought Iphigenia to Aulis. He suggested telling Clytemnestra that Achilles wanted to marry her daughter before departing for Troy. This would explain why the princess needed to come to the army camp. The false wedding would provide cover for the sacrifice. Clytemnestra arrived with her daughter and elaborate preparations for the wedding ceremony. The queen brought fine clothing, jewellery, and attendants appropriate for a royal marriage. She looked forward to seeing her daughter wed to Greece's greatest warrior. The deception could not be maintained once mother and daughter reached the army camp. Iphigenia quickly learned the true reason for her summons. She would die on Artemis's altar to purchase favourable winds for the expedition. Her wedding garments would become funeral shrouds. The young princess initially begged for her life with tears and desperate pleas. She reminded her father of his love and their happy times together. She asked what wrong she had committed that deserved death. Her innocence made the sacrifice even more heartbreaking, but gradually Iphigenia's courage overcame her fear. She recognized that thousands of Greek warriors depended on her sacrifice. Their wives and children needed them to return safely from Troy. She could save many lives by willingly offering her own. The princess's transformation from terrified victim to willing martyr impressed everyone who witnessed it. She walked to the altar with dignity befitting her royal blood. Her courage shamed the men who had demanded her death. Even hardened warriors wept at her nobility. Some versions of the story claim that Artemis substituted a deer for Iphigenia at the last moment. The goddess supposedly spirited the princess away to serve as her priestess in distant lands. This gentler ending reflects later Greek discomfort with the sacrifice's brutality. Clytemnestra's grief at her daughter's death would drive the next act of this tragic cycle. The queen swore vengeance against her husband for murdering their child. She would wait 10 years for Agamemnon's return from Troy, but her patience would be rewarded with perfect revenge. The sacrifice achieved its intended purpose immediately. Favourable winds filled the sails as soon as Iphigenia's blood touched the altar. The becalmed fleet suddenly had the power to depart for Troy. Artemis had accepted the offering and lifted her curse. The Greek ships departed Aulis with mixed emotions among their crews. They had achieved their immediate goal of divine favour, but the price paid for success troubled many participants. The war was beginning with bloodshed that tainted their righteous cause. The Greek expedition's first attempt to reach Troy ended in disaster through a navigation error that revealed the gods' continued interference. Strong winds that seemed favourable actually drove the fleet far off course. They landed on the shores of Mysia, believing they had reached their destination. King Telephus ruled Mysia with wisdom and strength. This son of Heracles commanded fierce warriors who defended their homeland against all invaders. When the Greeks began ravaging his coastline, Telephus mustered his forces for immediate counterattack. He would not allow foreign raiders to devastate his kingdom. The battle began before either side realized their mutual mistake. Greeks saw armed resistance from people they assumed were Trojans. Mysians fought desperately against invaders who seemed intent on conquest. The confusion created unnecessary bloodshed between potential allies. Achilles fought with terrifying effectiveness during the chaotic engagement. His divine armor turned aside every weapon, while his spear found its mark in opponent after opponent. No mortal warrior could stand against him in single combat. His presence dominated the battlefield. Telephus challenged the young hero to personal combat, hoping to stem the tide of battle through individual prowess. The Mysian king possessed great strength and skill inherited from his divine father. But even Heracles' blood could not match the god's special favor for Achilles. The duel ended with Telephus wounded by Achilles' enchanted spear. This weapon, forged by the centaur Chiron, created wounds that would not heal through normal means. The Mysian king collapsed from blood loss as his forces retreated in dismay. Victory belonged to the Greeks, but it was hollow. Oracles soon revealed the navigation error that had caused this unnecessary conflict. The Greeks had not reached Troy, but had attacked a neutral kingdom by mistake. Their victims were fellow Greeks who should have been allies rather than enemies. Divine misdirection had created tragic irony. Telephus's wound refused to heal despite the best efforts of physicians and priests. The injury festered and spread poison through his body. Divine prophecy revealed that only the weapon which caused the wound could cure it. The Mysian king must seek healing from his enemy Achilles. Disguised as a beggar, Telephus infiltrated the Greek camp and approached Achilles with his desperate request. The young hero initially refused to help, seeing no reason to heal an enemy. But oracles declared that the Greeks needed Telephus's guidance to reach Troy successfully. Achilles agreed to heal the wound in exchange for the Mysian king's service as a pilot. He scraped rust from his spear into the festering injury. The magic that had caused the wound now provided its cure. Telephus recovered completely within days. The grateful king shared his knowledge of eastern waters with the Greek navigators. He described the currents, winds, and landmarks they needed to reach Troy safely. His guidance would prevent further navigation errors that could delay or doom the expedition. But the Greeks faced additional delays as they attempted to regroup their scattered forces. The mistaken landing had dispersed ships across unfamiliar waters. Some vessels required repairs from battle damage. Others needed to resupply before continuing the voyage. The second gathering of the expedition took place at the island of Lemnos. This location provided a safe harbour while being closer to Troy than Aulis. The Greeks could complete their final preparations without fear of surprise attack. Local residents offered supplies and services to the massive military force. A snakebite nearly removed one of Greece's most important warriors during the stay at Lemnos. Philoctetes, who possessed the bow and arrows of Heracles, suffered a wound that refused to heal. The injury produced such a terrible stench that his comrades could not bear his presence. The abandoned warrior's cries of pain disturbed the entire camp day and night. His wound emitted an odour so foul that men could not eat in his vicinity. The practical concerns of maintaining military discipline overcame compassion for a suffering comrade. Odysseus convinced the other leaders that Philoctetes must be abandoned on Lemnos. They could not transport a man whose condition affected the entire expedition's morale and health. Cold necessity demanded this harsh decision, despite the archer's past service and future importance. The Greeks departed Lemnos, leaving Philoctetes alone on the island with only his divine bow for protection. They assumed he would die quickly from his untreated wound, but the abandoned hero would survive for 10 years, sustained by his burning desire for revenge against those who betrayed him. This cruel abandonment would later haunt the Greek expedition when oracles revealed that Troy could not be captured without Philoctetes' participation. The archer's divine weapons were essential for victory. The leaders who abandoned him would eventually grovel for his forgiveness. The Greek fleet finally approached the Trojan coastline after months of delays and false starts. Over 1,000 ships filled the horizon like a forest of masts and sails. The sight struck terror into Trojan watchers who had never imagined such naval power. This was the largest military expedition the world had ever seen. Troy's magnificent walls rose from the plain like a challenge to mortal ambition. The city's fortifications had withstood sieges for generations. Massive stones fitted together without mortar created barriers that seemed impregnable. 6 gates controlled access, while towers provided defensive positions for archers. Priam ordered immediate preparations for siege warfare. Granaries were filled with grain stored against years of blockade. Weapons and armor were distributed to every able-bodied man. The civilian population received instructions for rationing water and other essential supplies. Hector took command of Troy's military forces with grim determination. The Crown Prince understood that his city faced its greatest test. He would need to coordinate defensive strategy while maintaining morale among troops and civilians. The burden of protecting an entire civilization rested on his shoulders. The Greek fleet drew up on the beach beyond the range of Trojan archers. Landing operations began immediately as warriors waded ashore carrying weapons and supplies. They established a fortified beachhead while ships continued unloading men and equipment throughout the day. An oracle had warned that the first Greek to set foot on Trojan soil would die before the war ended. This prophecy made the warriors hesitant to lead the landing operations. No hero wanted to purchase glory at the cost of certain death. The advance stalled as men debated who should go first. Protesilaus finally ended the delay by leaping from his ship ahead of all others. This brave king of Phyllis chose duty over personal safety. He established the beachhead that allowed the entire army to land safely. But his noble sacrifice fulfilled the oracle's dark prediction. Hector led a sortie from the city to contest the Greek landing. The Trojan prince hoped to drive the invaders back into the sea before they could establish themselves on shore. His swift attack caught some Greeks still organizing their equipment on the beach. The first battle of the Trojan War proved inconclusive but costly for both sides. Greeks fought desperately to maintain their foothold while Trojans struggled to dislodge them. Protesilaus fell to Hector's spear early in the fighting, but his comrades rallied to avenge his death. Eventually the Greeks' superior numbers forced the Trojans to withdraw behind their walls. The invaders had successfully established their base on Trojan soil, but the defenders had shown that they would not yield their homeland without fierce resistance. Greek engineers immediately began constructing fortifications around their beachhead camp. They built walls, ditches, and palisades to protect their ships and supplies. This fortified base would serve as their headquarters throughout the long siege that everyone now anticipated. The geography favoured both attackers and defenders in different ways. Troy's walls made direct assault extremely dangerous, but the city's position on a hill made it vulnerable to blockade. The Greeks could control access to the sea, while the Trojans held the high ground. Both sides settled into siege positions that would remain essentially unchanged for the next 9 years. The Greeks controlled the plain and coastline around Troy. The Trojans held their city and the surrounding hills. Neither force possessed the strength to achieve decisive victory immediately. Skirmishes and raids replaced major battles as both armies adapted to siege warfare. Greeks raided Trojan territories seeking supplies and slaves. Trojans launched sorties to harass the invaders and gather intelligence. The war became a contest of endurance rather than decisive combat. Diplomatic efforts continued throughout the early stages of the siege. Envoys travelled between the opposing camps carrying offers of compromise and negotiation, but neither side proved willing to make the concessions necessary for peace. Pride and divine intervention prevented reasonable settlement. The siege lines hardened as both armies built permanent fortifications. What had begun as a rescue mission to recover Helen evolved into a war of conquest and survival. The stakes grew higher with each passing month as casualties mounted and hatred deepened. The first years of the siege established patterns of warfare that would characterize the entire conflict. Neither side possessed the strength to achieve quick victory. The Greeks could not breach Troy's mighty walls through direct assault. The Trojans lacked the numbers to drive the invaders permanently from their shores. Greek raiding parties ranged throughout the Troad seeking supplies and treasure. They attacked allied cities that supported Troy with men and materials. These expeditions served both practical and strategic purposes. The Greeks needed provisions while denying resources to their enemies. Achilles led many of these raids with devastating effectiveness. His swift ships struck coastal settlements before defenders could organize resistance. 12 cities fell to his assault in campaigns that enriched the Greek army. His reputation for invincibility grew with each victory. The young hero encountered his first truly formidable opponent during one of these expeditions. Cycnus, son of Poseidon, ruled a city allied with Troy. This warrior possessed invulnerability that turned aside every weapon. Swords could not cut him, spears could not pierce him, arrows bounced harmlessly from his skin. Achilles fought sickness in single combat before the walls of his city. The Greek hero's enchanted weapons proved useless against his opponent's divine protection. Spear thrusts that had killed dozens of warriors left sickness unharmed. The battle seemed hopeless, but Achilles adapted his tactics to overcome invulnerability. He used his shield's edge like a club to batter his opponent into submission. When weapons could not penetrate, blunt force could still cause internal injury. Sickness fell unconscious from repeated blows to his head. The Greek hero strangled sickness with the leather straps of his own helmet. Invulnerability could not protect against suffocation. The son of Poseidon died ignobly, defeated by an opponent who refused to accept the impossibility of victory. Sickness's death sent shockwaves through the Trojan alliance. If even divinely protected heroes could not stand against Achilles, what hope did ordinary mortals possess? Some allied cities began reconsidering their support for Priam's cause. Fear of the Greek champion undermined Trojan morale. Meanwhile, the personal conflict that had started the war remained unresolved. Menelaus challenged Paris to single combat to settle their dispute through individual prowess rather than mass warfare. The wronged husband demanded satisfaction from the man who had stolen his wife. Paris accepted the challenge reluctantly under pressure from his own people. Many Trojans blamed him for bringing this war upon their city. Single combat offered the possibility of ending the conflict without further bloodshed. Divine judgment would determine which man deserved Helen. The duel took place in the plain between the two armies. Warriors from both sides watched as their champions fought for personal honor and their people's fate. The outcome would demonstrate which side the gods favored in this cosmic conflict. Menelaus clearly dominated the combat from its beginning. His superior skill and burning anger gave him decisive advantages over his younger opponent. Paris fought defensively, seeking to avoid rather than inflict serious injury. The Spartan king pressed his attack relentlessly. The duel reached its climax when Menelaus seized Paris by his helmet crest and began dragging him toward the Greek lines. The leather strap that secured the helmet started to strangle the Trojan prince. Victory and vengeance seemed within the wronged husband's grasp, but Aphrodite intervened to save her chosen champion. The goddess snapped the helmet's chin strap and enveloped Paris in concealing mist. She spirited him away from the battlefield and deposited him safely in his chambers within Troy's walls. Divine intervention had cheated justice. Helen found Paris recovering from his humiliating defeat when she returned to their palace. The goddess Aphrodite compelled her to comfort her lover despite his cowardice in battle. Divine power overcame mortal judgment and natural inclination. The cycle of forbidden love continued. The duel's inconclusive outcome frustrated both armies and indicated the gods' divided loyalties. Neither side could claim moral victory when supernatural forces interfered with mortal combat. The war would continue because divine politics prevented human resolution. These early interventions established precedents for divine involvement throughout the conflict. Gods would repeatedly save favored mortals from death and defeat. Human agency operated within constraints imposed by immortal will. The Trojan War became a contest between divine factions as much as mortal armies. The pattern of indecisive combat and divine intervention characterized the siege's early years. Neither side could gain permanent advantage while the gods remained divided. Troy's walls protected the defenders, while Greek ships ensured the attackers' supply lines. Troy's walls protected the defenders, while Greek ships ensured the attackers' supply lines. The war settled into a costly stalemate. The greatest warrior who ever lived was born from the union of mortal king and immortal sea nymph. Achilles inherited divine gifts from his mother Thetis, and human courage from his father Peleus. This combination created a hero whose prowess surpassed all others. His very name would become synonymous with martial excellence. Thetis attempted to make her son immortal through secret rituals performed in darkness. She held the infant Achilles by his heel and dipped him in the river Styx. The waters of the underworld granted invulnerability to every part of his body they touched. But the heel where his mother grasped him remained vulnerable to mortal weapons. The sea nymph also placed her baby in divine fire each night to burn away his mortal nature. This process would have granted complete immortality if completed. But Peleus discovered his wife's activities and stopped her in horror. His intervention preserved Achilles' humanity while limiting his divine protection. Thetis departed for her underwater realm after Peleus interfered with her plans. She could not remain with mortals who did not understand divine necessity. The sea nymph would watch her son's career from afar, intervening only at crucial moments. Her love remained constant despite their separation. King Peleus entrusted his son's education to Chiron the centaur. This wise creature lived on Mount Pelion, where he taught heroes the skills they needed for greatness. Chiron combined the knowledge of civilization with understanding of the natural world. No teacher could have provided better preparation for heroic life. Achilles learned music, medicine, and hunting from his immortal instructor. He could sing beautifully, heal wounds with herbs, and track any creature through the wilderness. These peaceful arts balanced the warrior training that would make him invincible in battle. Chiron believed that true heroes needed both gentleness and ferocity. The centaur taught Achilles to use weapons with supernatural skill. His student mastered sword, spear, and bow with equal facility. But Chiron's greatest gift was an enchanted ash spear that only Achilles could wield effectively. This weapon would never miss its target or fail to kill. Physical training under Chiron's guidance made Achilles the swiftest runner among mortals. His feet barely touched the ground when he ran at full speed. Enemies could not escape his pursuit or catch him in retreat. This speed earned him the epithet swift-footed that poets would always use. The prophecy that haunted Achilles throughout his life came from the fates themselves. He could choose between two destinies that could not be changed. He might live a long, peaceful life in obscurity, dying old in his bed surrounded by children and grandchildren, or he could win eternal glory through deeds that poets would sing forever, but die young on foreign soil. This choice tormented Achilles because both options had appeal. The prospect of peaceful happiness attracted his human nature inherited from Peleus. But the promise of undying fame spoke to his divine heritage from Thetis. The decision would define not only his life, but the entire course of the Trojan War. Achilles chose glory over longevity when he joined the expedition to Troy. He made this decision knowing it meant early death far from home. The young hero valued reputation more than years. He would rather burn brilliantly and briefly than glow dimly for decades. His mother Thetis grieved for this choice while understanding its inevitability. Divine blood demanded divine achievements that mortal lifespans could not accomplish. She commissioned new armor from Hephaestus to protect her son as long as possible. But even divine craftsmanship could not change the fate's decree. Achilles' rage became as legendary as his prowess in battle. When roused to anger, the young hero fought with fury that terrified enemies and allies alike. His divine nature emerged most clearly in these moments of transcendent wrath. Mortals could not understand or control such passion. This rage would drive the most important events of the Trojan War. Achilles' withdrawal from battle in anger at Agamemnon changed the war's entire dynamic. His return to combat seeking vengeance for Patroclus doomed Troy to destruction. Divine emotion shaped mortal destiny through one hero's passionate nature. The Greeks recognized Achilles as their greatest asset and most dangerous liability. His presence guaranteed victory in any battle, but his temperament made him impossible to control or predict. Leaders who tried to command him discovered that God's sons obeyed only their own sense of honor. Achilles fought not for conquest or plunder, but for the pure joy of excellence in battle. He sought worthy opponents who could test his skills to their limits. The hero found his greatest satisfaction in defeating enemies who possessed genuine courage and ability. Lesser opponents provided no real glory. His relationship with his closest companion Patroclus defined the gentler side of his nature. These two heroes shared a bond deeper than brotherhood. Some claimed they were lovers, others insisted they were simply perfect friends. Their connection transcended ordinary human relationships. When Patroclus died wearing Achilles' armor, the greatest warrior discovered that even divine strength could not protect those he loved most. His grief and rage at this loss would drive him to acts of vengeance that shocked both armies. Love and loss transformed the lion-hearted hero into an agent of divine retribution. Priam's eldest son carried the weight of an entire civilization on his shoulders. Hector understood that Troy's survival depended on his courage and leadership. He had not chosen this war, but he would defend his city and people with every breath in his body. Duty meant more to him than personal glory or safety. The crown prince of Troy possessed all the virtues that made heroes beloved by gods and men. His courage never failed in the darkest moments of battle. His wisdom guided strategic decisions that kept Troy's defences strong. His compassion for common soldiers earned their absolute loyalty and devotion. Hector's marriage to Andromache provided the emotional centre of his heroic identity. This noble woman had lost her father and brothers to Achilles' raids. She clung to her husband as her only remaining protection against the world's cruelty. Their love represented everything worth defending in civilized life. Their infant son Astyanax embodied Troy's future and Hector's deepest hopes. The child would inherit the throne if the city survived this war. Hector fought not just for present victory, but for his son's right to rule a free Troy. Every battle was fought for the next generation's sake. The prince's daily routine during the siege balanced military duties with family responsibilities. He inspected defences at dawn, fought battles during the day, and returned home to wife and child each evening. This pattern gave meaning to endless warfare. He had reasons beyond honour for risking his life. Hector's farewell to his family before each day's fighting became one of the war's most poignant recurring scenes. Andromache would beg him to remain safely within the walls. Little Astyanax would cry when his father donned his frightening helmet. These domestic moments humanized the greatest Trojan warrior. The prince always reassured his wife that duty demanded he face whatever dangers the day might bring. He could not remain safe while his people suffered and died for their freedom. Personal happiness mattered less than collective survival. A king's son had obligations that ordinary men could escape. Hector's leadership style differed markedly from Achilles' approach to warfare. The Greek hero fought as an individual seeking personal excellence. The Trojan prince fought as part of a community defending shared values. This difference reflected their culture's contrasting priorities. The burden of command forced Hector to make terrible decisions that haunted his knights. He ordered sorties that resulted in brave men's deaths. He rationed supplies, knowing that some would starve. Leadership in wartime required choices that no good man could make without anguish. Even enemies respected Hector's nobility and fighting skill. Greek warriors acknowledged that he was the only Trojan who could match their greatest champions. His reputation for honour made him trusted even by opponents. War had not corrupted his essential decency. The prince showed mercy to defeated enemies when circumstances permitted. He spared suppliants who threw themselves on his protection. He ensured proper burial for enemy dead when truces allowed. These gestures maintained civilized standards amid warfare's brutality. Hector's strategic mind understood Troy's fundamental weakness in this conflict. The city could not win through aggressive action, but might survive through stubborn defense. He fought a conservative war aimed at outlasting Greek resolve rather than achieving decisive victory. The prince coordinated Troy's allies with diplomatic skill that matched his military prowess. He maintained relationships with distant kingdoms that sent reinforcements. His ability to work with foreign commanders kept the coalition united despite cultural differences and competing interests. Divine favor blessed Hector's efforts without making him arrogant about supernatural support. Apollo protected him in battle and guided his tactical decisions, but the prince never assumed that divine aid would substitute for human courage and careful planning. Hector's prophetic dreams revealed his ultimate fate without breaking his resolve. He knew that Achilles would eventually kill him in single combat. This knowledge made every day with his family precious beyond measure. He fought on despite certainty of doom. The prince's nobility created moral complexity for his enemies. Greek heroes respected him too much to hate him completely. They fought against the finest representative of everything they were trying to destroy. Victory would require killing the most admirable man in Troy. Hector's death would break Trojan morale more completely than losing a dozen ordinary warriors. He embodied his people's courage and hope for survival. When he fell, Troy's heart would break with his. The prince carried his city's fate in his own person. His legacy would outlive Troy itself through the stories poets told of his heroism. Hector represented the ideal of a warrior who fought for love rather than glory. His example would inspire future generations facing overwhelming odds. Death could not diminish such nobility. The expedition against Troy assembled heroes whose diverse talents created an irresistible force when properly coordinated. Each champion brought unique skills that complemented the other's abilities. Together, they formed the greatest military coalition in heroic history. Ajax the Greater from Salamis served as the Greeks' primary defensive specialist. This massive warrior carried a shield like a tower that could protect entire sections of the battle line. His presence anchored any position where the fighting grew most desperate. Enemies learned to avoid direct confrontation with this immovable object. The son of Telamon stood nearly 7 feet tall with proportional strength and endurance. His bronze-covered shield measured 4 feet across and weighed more than most men could lift. Ajax wielded this defensive masterpiece with one hand while fighting with sword or spear in the other. No Greek warrior could match Ajax's staying power in prolonged combat. He fought all day without tiring, while lesser heroes needed rest and refreshment. His endurance became legendary during siege operations that required constant vigilance. Ajax could hold any position indefinitely. The great Ajax possessed a defensive mindset that prioritized protecting comrades over personal glory. He rescued wounded heroes from overwhelming odds. He covered retreats when tactical situations required withdrawal. His unselfishness made him beloved by common soldiers who served under his protection. Ajax the Lesser ruled Locris and brought very different talents to the Greek coalition. This smaller hero relied on speed and agility rather than brute strength. He could dart between enemy formations, strike vital targets, and escape before retaliation arrived. His hit-and-run tactics confused opponents who expected straightforward heroic combat. The son of Oileus excelled at archery and javelin throwing in addition to close combat skills. His accuracy with missile weapons made him valuable during siege operations. He could pick off defenders on Troy's walls from distances that defeated other archers. His versatility filled multiple tactical roles. Diomedes the Tydides brought divine favor that made him temporarily equal to immortal opponents. This young king of Argos possessed courage that knew no limits. He attacked gods themselves when they interfered in mortal combat. His boldness shocked even veteran warriors accustomed to heroic excess. The son of Tydeus wounded both Ares and Aphrodite during a single day's fighting. Athena guided his spear to find divine flesh that mortal weapons normally could not touch. These achievements demonstrated that gods were not completely beyond mortal reach when divine justice supported the attack. Diomedes combined reckless courage with sound tactical judgment. He knew when to press attacks and when to withdraw. His strategic instincts complemented his fighting prowess. The king could command armies as effectively as he fought individual duels. Odysseus the Many-Minded contributed intelligence and cunning that balanced other heroes' reliance on strength and courage. The king of Ithaca solved problems that could not be resolved through direct action. His creative mind found alternatives when conventional approaches failed. The son of Laertes excelled at reconnaissance, diplomacy, and psychological warfare. He gathered intelligence about enemy plans and capabilities. He negotiated with neutral kingdoms for supplies and support. He devised stratagems that multiplied Greek effectiveness without requiring additional manpower. Odysseus's greatest contribution would be the wooden horse that finally breached Troy's defences. This masterpiece of deception succeeded where years of direct assault had failed. Intelligence triumphed where strength had proven insufficient. Nestor of Pylos provided wisdom drawn from 3 generations of heroic experience. This aged king had fought alongside legendary heroes of earlier eras. His counsel guided strategic decisions throughout the long siege. Younger leaders respected his judgment even when they disagreed with his recommendations. The son of Neleus possessed unmatched knowledge of warfare's practical aspects. He understood supply lines, fortifications, and camp organization. His administrative skills kept the Greek army functioning effectively despite its enormous size and complexity. Nestor's diplomatic abilities proved as valuable as his military expertise. He mediated disputes between proud heroes who might otherwise have fought each other. His respected voice could call for unity when factional divisions threatened the expedition's cohesion. Other heroes brought specialized skills that enhanced the coalition's overall effectiveness. Idomeneus of Crete commanded expert archers and naval forces. Philoctetes wielded Heracles' infallible bow when he rejoined the expedition. Neoptolemus inherited his father Achilles' divine weapons and savage prowess. The diversity of Greek talents created tactical flexibility that Trojan defenders could not match. Different situations called for different approaches. The expedition could adapt its methods to exploit enemy weaknesses or counter their strengths. Competition between heroes drove individual excellence to unprecedented heights. Each champion sought to outdo the others in courage and achievement. This rivalry produced superhuman efforts that no single hero could have sustained alone. The combination of diverse heroic talents under unified command created military power that could overcome any defense. Troy's walls were strong, but the heroes besieging them possessed every skill needed for victory. Time would reveal which force was truly superior. Troy's defense relied not only on Hector's leadership but on a coalition of heroes whose courage matched any Greek champion. The city's allies brought diverse fighting styles and cultural traditions to the war. Together, they created a defensive force that held the world's greatest army at bay for 10 long years. Aeneas the Dardanian commanded Trojan forces second only to Hector himself. This son of Aphrodite possessed divine favour that protected him through countless battles. The goddess of love had destined him for survival and ultimate triumph, far from Troy's doomed walls. His fate lay across the western sea. The Prince of Dardania fought with skill that rivaled Achilles or Diomedes. Divine blood flowed in his veins just as it did in theirs. But Aeneas combined martial prowess with wisdom that would make him a great king. He thought beyond immediate victory to long-term consequences. Aeneas carried sacred objects that connected Troy to divine protection. The Palladium and Penates under his guardianship embodied the city's spiritual essence. When Troy fell, these sacred relics would travel with him to establish new cities. Destiny marked him as civilization's preserver rather than destroyer. The Dardanian prince served as Hector's most trusted lieutenant and closest friend. These two heroes coordinated Troy's defensive strategies with perfect understanding. Their cooperation maximized the city's limited military resources. Neither jealousy nor ambition divided their partnership. Sarpedon of Lycia led the largest contingent of foreign allies supporting Troy's cause. This son of Zeus commanded warriors renowned for their courage and loyalty. His royal blood gave him authority to speak for all allied contingents. His death would mark the beginning of Troy's final decline. The Lycian king fought with divine favour inherited from his immortal father. Zeus watched over his son's battles with paternal pride and concern, but even the king of gods could not alter fate to preserve a mortal child. Divine parentage brought glory but not immortality. Sarpedon's relationship with his cousin Glaucus demonstrated the bonds that held Troy's alliance together. These two Lycian princes fought side by side through every major battle. Their friendship embodied the loyalty that kept foreign troops fighting for a distant city's freedom. The famous encounter between Glaucus and Diomedes revealed how guest friendship could transcend even warfare's bitterness. When these heroes discovered their grandfathers had been allies, they exchanged armor instead of blows. Ancient bonds of hospitality proved stronger than current enmity. Glaucus's golden armor traded for Diomedes' bronze became a symbol of honor transcending material value. The Lycian prince gave generously to acknowledge past obligations. His nobility impressed even enemies who witnessed this extraordinary exchange. Memnon of Ethiopia arrived late in the war, leading fresh troops from distant Africa. This son of the dawn brought exotic weapons and fighting techniques unfamiliar to both armies. His forces provided new hope for Troy's increasingly desperate situation. The Ethiopian prince possessed courage and skill that rivaled Achilles himself. Their eventual duel would prove the war's most evenly matched single combat. Both heroes enjoyed divine parentage and supernatural protection. Victory would depend on minute advantages rather than overwhelming superiority. Memnon's armor rivaled Achilles' divine panoply in beauty and effectiveness. His weapons bore enchantments crafted by Eastern smiths, whose techniques differed from Greek methods. The sight of this magnificent warrior restored Trojan confidence after months of declining morale. Penthesilea led her Amazon warriors in Troy's final desperate phase. This warrior queen brought a completely different fighting style to the conflict. Her mounted archers could strike swiftly and retreat before enemies could respond. Traditional heroic combat could not counter such tactics. The Amazon queen's beauty rivaled Helen's in its own fierce way. Where Helen embodied peaceful loveliness, Penthesilea radiated the terrible attractiveness of war itself. Her appearance on the battlefield stirred both fear and desire among her opponents. Penthesilea's death at Achilles' hands would create one of the war's most tragic moments. The Greek hero fell in love with his victim as she died. His grief and guilt over killing such magnificence added to the moral complexity that surrounded every heroic action. Other allied heroes brought specialized skills that enhanced Troy's defensive capabilities. Rhesus of Thrace commanded the finest horses in the world. Euphemus could run across water without wetting his feet. Asteropaeus fought equally well with either hand. The diversity of Troy's defenders reflected the city's role as a crossroads of civilizations. Warriors came from Europe, Asia, and Africa to defend this cosmopolitan center. Their combined traditions created military capabilities that pure Greek forces could not match. Religious dedication united Troy's diverse alliance despite cultural differences. All participants recognized this as a holy war to defend civilization against barbarian aggression. Sacred duty transcended national interests in motivating continued resistance. The gradual loss of these heroic allies would doom Troy more surely than any single military defeat. Each fallen champion represented not only individual loss, but the breaking of bonds that held the coalition together. Troy's fate depended on maintaining unity among diverse peoples. The god Apollo struck the Greek army with pestilence that revealed the price of insulting divine servants. Disease arrows flew invisibly from his silver bow to claim victims throughout the camp. Soldiers who had survived Trojan spears died writhing in fever. The siege nearly collapsed before Troy's walls. Agamemnon had captured Chrysis during a raid on Apollo's temple in nearby Chrysae. This beautiful priestess served the god of music and prophecy with pure devotion. Her father Chrysis offered enormous ransom for her return. The High King's refusal brought divine wrath upon the entire expedition. The plague began with animals in the Greek camp. Mules and dogs died first as Apollo's arrows found their marks. Soon the disease spread to human victims who fell with no visible wounds. Their bodies burned with fever, while their minds wandered in delirium. Funeral pyres burned continuously as the death toll mounted. Warriors who had laughed at Trojan resistance now faced an enemy they could not fight. No armor could turn aside divine arrows. No shield could protect against supernatural disease. The army's morale crumbled as fear replaced confidence in eventual victory. Men whispered that the gods favored Troy over their expedition. Some spoke of abandoning the siege and returning home. Divine opposition seemed too powerful for mortal strength to overcome. Achilles finally called for an assembly to address the crisis threatening their mission. The young hero possessed courage to speak honestly about problems that others preferred to ignore. His divine heritage gave him authority to question decisions that common soldiers dared not challenge. Calchas, the prophet, understood the plague's cause through his gift of interpreting divine signs. But the seer feared to speak openly of Agamemnon's error. The High King's pride was dangerous even in desperate circumstances. Truth-telling could be fatal for messengers bearing unwelcome news. Achilles guaranteed Calchas's protection if he revealed the cause of their suffering. The greatest Greek warrior's promise overcame the prophet's fears. Divine truth demanded expression regardless of human consequences. The gods required acknowledgement of their power. The seer's revelation struck the assembly like lightning. Apollo demanded return of crisis without ransom. The High King must surrender his prize and acknowledge divine superiority. Pride must yield to religious necessity if the plague was to end. Agamemnon's rage at this demand revealed the arrogance that had caused their troubles. He accused Calchas of always bringing bad news and never supporting royal authority. The king preferred comfortable lies to difficult truths. His attitude guaranteed future conflicts with divine will. The High King eventually agreed to return Chryseis but demanded replacement compensation. He would not bear the loss alone while other leaders kept their prizes. If divine justice required his sacrifice, then human justice demanded shared burdens. His logic seemed reasonable but ignored heroic custom. Agamemnon's eye fell upon Briseis, the captive maiden who served as Achilles' prize and companion. This beautiful woman had been awarded to the greatest warrior according to established precedent. Her seizure would violate every principle that governed heroic distribution of spoils. The confrontation between Supreme Commander and Greatest Warrior split the entire army into competing factions. Both men possessed legitimate claims that could not be easily resolved. Divine necessity conflicted with human honor in ways that no compromise could satisfy. Achilles' threat to abandon the expedition if Briseis was taken revealed the expedition's fundamental weakness. The Greeks needed their greatest warrior more than he needed them. Individual excellence could not be commanded like ordinary military service. The crisis deepened when neither hero would yield to the other's demands. Agamemnon insisted on his rights as supreme commander. Achilles maintained his prerogatives as the army's most valuable asset. Both positions had merit that made resolution nearly impossible. The return of Chryseis ended the plague but began a greater catastrophe. Apollo lifted his curse when his priestess reached her father's arms. But Achilles' withdrawal from combat would cost more lives than the gods' arrows had claimed. Human pride proved more destructive than divine anger. The greatest warrior's rage transformed the entire character of the Trojan War. What had begun as a united Greek expedition became a fractured coalition weakened by internal strife. Divine emotion operating through human pride created chaos that threatened to destroy their cause from within. Agamemnon's seizure of Briseis violated every custom that governed heroic society. Prizes won in battle belonged to the warriors who earned them through valor. Supreme commanders could not arbitrarily redistribute spoils according to personal whim. The High King's action set dangerous precedents. Achilles' response revealed the depth of his attachment to the captive maiden. Briseis had become more than a prize or slave to the young hero. She provided emotional comfort that eased the isolation of his superhuman nature. Her loss struck at his heart as well as his honor. The confrontation between king and hero nearly erupted into violence that would have shattered the expedition immediately. Achilles drew his sword to kill Agamemnon before the entire assembly. Only Athena's intervention prevented bloodshed that would have doomed their cause. The goddess of wisdom appeared to Achilles alone and restrained his homicidal rage. She promised that greater glory awaited him if he controlled his temper. Divine patience would be rewarded with gifts beyond anything Agamemnon could offer. Wisdom counselled restraint over immediate satisfaction. Achilles sheathed his sword but unleashed a verbal assault that wounded more deeply than bronze weapons. He called Agamemnon a coward who fought from behind, while braver men died for his ambitions. He predicted military disasters when the army's greatest defender withdrew his protection. The young hero's prophecy of Greek defeat struck fear into every listener's heart. They knew that Achilles spoke truth about his military importance. Without his divine strength supporting their cause, victory against Troy seemed impossible. Their commander had created a crisis that threatened everyone. Achilles formally withdrew from combat and ordered his Myrmidons to remain neutral in future battles. He would defend his own ships if attacked directly, but would not fight for Greek victory. The coalition's greatest asset had become a passive observer of their struggles. The hero's mother Thetis emerged from the sea to comfort her son's wounded pride. The sea nymph possessed divine authority that could influence events on Mount Olympus. Her intervention would shape the war's course according to Achilles' desires for vindication. Thetis ascended to Zeus's throne to petition for Greek defeats that would demonstrate her son's importance. She reminded the king of gods of his debt for her past assistance. Divine obligation compelled Zeus to honor requests from the sea nymph who had saved his reign. The king of gods reluctantly agreed to support Trojan victories until Achilles returned to battle. This divine intervention would reverse the war's momentum completely. Greek confidence would crumble as their enemies gained seemingly impossible advantages. Zeus's promise created opposition from Hera, who favored Greek victory in this conflict. The Queen of Heaven recognized that divine support for Troy contradicted their established policy. Her husband's pledge to Thetis threatened to derail carefully laid plans. The divine argument between Zeus and Hera reflected the cosmic significance of Achilles' withdrawal. When the greatest mortal warrior refused to fight, even gods had to adjust their strategies. Individual excellence possessed power to influence divine politics. Greek morale collapsed when news of Achilles' withdrawal spread throughout the army. Soldiers who had followed him into impossible battles now faced those same dangers without his protection. The expedition's greatest strength had become its most obvious weakness. Trojan confidence soared as their enemy's dissension became apparent. Hector recognized this opportunity to break the siege that had lasted 9 years. With Achilles absent from the battlefield, Troy's defenders could achieve victories previously impossible. The psychological impact of losing Achilles exceeded even his military contribution. Greek warriors had believed themselves invincible with him leading their charges. His absence destroyed that confidence and replaced it with doubt about their ultimate success. Agamemnon discovered that supreme command meant little without willing subordinates. His authority depended on consent from heroes who could withdraw their support. The High King's power was more fragile than he had realized. The wrath of Achilles would drive every subsequent event in the war's climactic phase. His anger needed satisfaction that only Agamemnon's humiliation could provide. But that vindication would come at a price in blood that no one anticipated. The Greek army's weakness became apparent as soon as Achilles withdrew his support. Trojan forces that had cowered behind their walls for 9 years suddenly pressed aggressive attacks. Hector led sorties that drove the invaders back toward their ships. Victory seemed within Troy's grasp. Divine favor clearly supported the Trojans during this phase of the conflict. Zeus honored his promise to Thetis by ensuring Greek defeats in every major engagement. Weapons missed their targets when Greeks attacked. Trojan spears found gaps in enemy armor with supernatural accuracy. Hector's leadership inspired his followers to achievements beyond their normal capabilities. The Crown Prince of Troy fought with divine blessing that made him nearly equal to Achilles himself. His spear never missed its mark. His shield turned aside every attack. Apollo guided his steps throughout each battle. The Greeks fell back steadily as their defensive lines crumbled under relentless pressure. Positions they had held for years were abandoned in desperate retreats. The mighty wall protecting their camp became their last refuge against complete destruction. Agamemnon watched his authority evaporate along with his military advantages. Heroes who had respected his position now questioned every decision. Some openly blamed him for their desperate situation. The High King's seizure of Briseis had cost more than anyone anticipated. Desperate circumstances forced the Greek leaders to attempt reconciliation with their greatest warrior. An embassy consisting of Ajax, Odysseus, and Phoenix travelled to Achilles' tent with unprecedented offers of compensation. They carried gifts worth a king's ransom. Agamemnon's proposed reparations included 7 tripods, 10 talents of gold, and 20 burnished cauldrons. He offered 12 prize-winning racehorses and 7 skilled women captives. 7 cities would become Achilles' personal property. Briseis would be returned with solemn oaths that she remained untouched. The High King even offered his own daughter in marriage with an enormous dowry. This alliance would make Achilles his son-in-law and potential heir. No greater honour could be offered to any warrior. The gifts demonstrated complete capitulation to Achilles' demands. Phoenix spoke first as Achilles' former tutor and surrogate father. The old hero reminded his student of lessons about yielding to supplication and accepting reasonable compensation. He warned against excessive pride that destroyed heroes through inflexibility. Ajax followed with blunt soldier's speech that appealed to loyalty and brotherhood. He reminded Achilles of comradeship bonds forged through shared dangers. The greatest warrior owed protection to men who had followed him into desperate battles. Odysseus presented Agamemnon's formal offer with eloquent persuasion designed to appeal to practical considerations. He emphasized the enormous value of the compensation and the honor of royal marriage. No reasonable man could reject such magnificent reparations. Achilles' response shocked the embassy with its absolute rejection of reconciliation. He declared that Agamemnon's gifts could not restore his damaged honor. Life itself mattered less than the respect that had been stolen from him. No treasure could purchase what had been lost. The young hero's inflexibility revealed the divine nature that set him apart from ordinary mortals. Human considerations of profit and advantage meant nothing to someone whose values transcended mortal concerns. Achilles operated according to principles that mere men could not understand. His rejection of marriage to Agamemnon's daughter particularly disturbed the ambassadors. This alliance would have secured his future beyond anything possible through military service. The refusal suggested that Achilles had abandoned all concern for practical benefits. The hero spoke longingly of returning home to live peacefully in his father's kingdom. He described the quiet happiness that awaited him in Phthia among familiar faces and beloved landscapes. Glory no longer seemed worth the price being demanded, yet Achilles could not bring himself to actually depart from Troy. Something deeper than conscious decision bound him to this place where destiny awaited fulfillment. Divine fate proved stronger than rational choice or emotional preference. The embassy's failure deepened Greek despair and increased Trojan confidence. Hector's forces pressed their advantage more aggressively than ever. The siege that had lasted 9 years might end in complete Greek defeat. Troy's liberation seemed imminent. Fighting reached the Greek ships as Trojan attacks finally breached their defensive wall. Fire arrows threatened to destroy the vessels that represented their only escape route. Complete disaster loomed unless something could reverse their declining fortunes. The closest companion of Greece's greatest warrior could no longer bear watching his countrymen die while Achilles nursed his wounded pride. Patroclus possessed a gentle heart that felt others' suffering as his own. His compassion would drive him to a heroic gesture that changed everything. Nestor's son Antilochus brought news of the desperate battle raging around the Greek ships. He described how Hector's forces had breached their defensive wall and threatened to burn their entire fleet. Only immediate intervention could prevent complete disaster. Patroclus wept as he heard details of the slaughter claiming so many brave warriors. He begged Achilles to return to battle or at least allow him to fight wearing the divine armor. The sight of those famous weapons might frighten Trojan forces enough to save the ships. Achilles refused to rejoin the fighting, but agreed to let his dearest friend wear the divine panoply. He warned Patroclus to drive the Trojans from the ships but not pursue them toward the city. The armor would provide protection, but reckless courage could still prove fatal. The appearance of what seemed to be Achilles returning to battle electrified both armies. Greek morale soared while Trojan confidence wavered. The greatest warrior's divine armor blazed like fire in the sunlight. His famous spear promised death to anyone who faced it. Patroclus led the Myrmidons in a charge that shattered Trojan lines immediately. These elite warriors had waited 9 years for this moment. Their pent-up fury exploded against enemies who had grown accustomed to victory. The battle's momentum shifted instantly. The disguised hero fought with skill that nearly matched his friend's legendary prowess. Divine armor enhanced his natural abilities, while the famous weapons found their marks with supernatural accuracy. For a brief time, Patroclus seemed truly to be Achilles reborn. Trojan forces retreated in panic as their recent victories turned to sudden defeat. Warriors who had pressed triumphant attacks now fled desperately toward their city's protection. The Greek counter-offensive swept everything before it with irresistible force, but success made Patroclus forget Achilles' warning about pursuing enemies too far. The thrill of victory overcame prudent caution as he chased fleeing Trojans across the plain. Divine armor made him feel invincible, despite his mortal limitations. Apollo intervened to protect Troy from this renewed Greek assault. The god of prophecy struck Patroclus with invisible force that stunned him and stripped away the divine armor. Mortal flesh stood revealed beneath celestial protection. Euphorbus struck the first blow against the defenseless hero with a spear thrust between his shoulder blades. This young Trojan warrior seized the opportunity that divine intervention had provided. His bronze point found mortal flesh that could no longer deflect weapons. Hector arrived as Patroclus staggered from his wound and delivered the killing stroke. The Crown Prince of Troy claimed credit for slaying Greece's greatest champion. He stripped the divine armor from his victim's body as proof of his victory. The battle for Patroclus's corpse became one of the war's most savage engagements. Greeks fought desperately to recover their hero's body, while Trojans sought to drag it away for desecration. Honor demanded that comrades protect their fallen champion. Ajax the Greater played the crucial role in finally recovering Patroclus's remains. His massive shield protected the rescue party while they carried their burden to safety. The hero's body reached Greek lines, but his divine armor remained in Trojan hands. News of Patroclus's death reached Achilles through Antilochus's tearful report. The messenger feared to deliver such devastating news to the grief-stricken hero. He approached slowly with words that would transform the war's entire character. Achilles' reaction exceeded even his closest friend's expectations. The greatest warrior threw himself on the ground and poured dust over his head in traditional mourning. His cries of anguish could be heard throughout the camp and across the plain to Troy itself. Thetis emerged from the sea depths to comfort her son's overwhelming grief. The sea nymph understood that this loss would drive Achilles to actions from which there could be no return. His gentler nature died with Patroclus on Troy's bloody plain. The hero's transformation from grieving friend to implacable avenger began immediately. He swore mighty oaths to kill Hector in revenge for Patroclus's death. Divine fury replaced human emotion as Achilles prepared for his final battles. Thetis commissioned new armor from Hephaestus to replace the divine panoply lost with Patroclus. The smith god would create his masterpiece for the hero, who would need supernatural protection for the terrible deeds ahead. The war approached its climactic phase. The forge fires of Hephaestus burned through the night as the divine smith crafted armor worthy of the world's greatest warrior. This panoply would surpass even the previous set in beauty and protective power. Every piece bore decorations that told the entire story of mortal civilization. The shield's intricate designs depicted two cities representing peace and war. One showed weddings, festivals, and legal proceedings that characterized civilized life. The other displayed siege warfare, battles, and funeral rites. The contrast embodied everything Achilles fought to preserve or destroy. Thetis delivered the completed armour to her son at dawn. The divine bronze gleamed like fire in the early sunlight. The helmet's horsehair plume flowed like living flame. No mortal smith could have created such magnificent workmanship. Achilles' reconciliation with Agamemnon proceeded swiftly once the greatest warrior decided to return to battle. Personal grievances seemed trivial compared to avenging Patroclus' death. The hero accepted all offered gifts without examining them closely. Only vengeance mattered now. The High King's apology acknowledged his error in seizing Briseis and insulting Achilles' honour. He blamed divine madness for his actions rather than accepting personal responsibility. This excuse satisfied formal requirements while avoiding deeper admission of fault. Briseis returned to Achilles' tent amid great ceremony. The captive maiden had genuinely mourned Patroclus, who had treated her with kindness during her captivity. Her grief added another personal dimension to the hero's quest for revenge. The Greek army's morale soared as their greatest champion prepared for battle. Warriors who had faced defeat now anticipated certain victory. Achilles' presence transformed their desperate situation into an opportunity for glorious triumph. Divine armor enhanced Achilles' already supernatural fighting abilities. The new panoply seemed to glow with inner fire that reflected his burning desire for vengeance. No earthly weapon could penetrate such protection. No mortal warrior could stand against such power. The hero's Aristeia began immediately as he entered the battlefield seeking Hector. His spear claimed victim after victim, while his sword harvested lives like grain before the scythe. Trojan resistance crumbled before this unstoppable force of nature. Rivers ran red with blood as Achilles carved a path of destruction through enemy ranks. The Scamander itself became choked with corpses until the river god protested this pollution of his sacred waters. Even divine forces recoiled from such slaughter. Trojan forces fled in panic toward their city's protective walls. Warriors who had fought bravely for 9 years now ran like children before a nightmare. Nothing in their experience had prepared them for Achilles' supernatural fury. Only Hector remained outside Troy's gates to face the avenging hero. The crown prince knew he could not defeat Achilles in single combat, but duty demanded that he try to defend his city and people. Honor required courage even in hopeless circumstances. The final chase around Troy's walls became the war's most dramatic single episode. Hector ran while Achilles pursued with relentless determination. 3 times they circled the city while both armies watched in breathless silence. Divine intervention finally ended the pursuit when Athena deceived Hector into making his stand. The goddess appeared disguised as his brother Deiphobus, offering support. This false reinforcement convinced the prince to turn and fight. The duel itself proved anticlimactic after such elaborate build-up. Achilles' divine armor and superior skill gave him overwhelming advantages. Hector fought bravely but hopelessly against an opponent enhanced by supernatural power and burning hatred. Hector's death fulfilled the prophecy that had driven him throughout the war. The noblest Trojan finally fell to the spear he had known would kill him. His courage in facing certain doom elevated him above mere victory or defeat. Achilles' desecration of Hector's corpse shocked both armies with its savage brutality. The hero dragged his enemy's body behind his chariot around the city walls. Divine fury had transformed the noble warrior into something barely human. The greatest warrior's vengeance was complete, but his own doom approached rapidly. Killing Hector had satisfied his need for revenge while sealing his fate. Divine prophecy promised that his death would follow soon after his enemies. The old king of Troy watched from his palace walls as Achilles dragged his son's body in the dust. 11 days had passed since Hector fell. The greatest warrior continued his savage ritual each dawn. He drove his chariot around the city walls with the corpse bouncing behind. Divine preservation kept the body intact despite this brutal treatment. Priam's grief consumed him like fire in his bones. He could not eat or sleep while his beloved son remained unburied. The king's counsellors feared for his sanity as he paced the palace corridors, muttering prayers to any god who might listen. His wife Hecuba wept constantly beside him. The goddess Iris appeared to Priam in his darkest hour with a message from Zeus himself. The king of gods commanded that he journey to the Greek camp alone. He must carry ransom to Achilles and beg for Hector's body like a common suppliant. Only this humiliation would purchase his son's return. Divine inspiration overcame mortal fear in the old king's heart. He gathered treasure from the royal vaults without counting the cost. Gold and silver, bronze tripods and fine-woven cloth-filled wagon after wagon. No price was too high for recovering his son's remains. Priam's family tried desperately to dissuade him from this dangerous mission. They reminded him that Achilles had killed many of his other sons. The Greek hero showed no mercy to Trojan prisoners. The king would likely die without accomplishing anything useful, but divine command could not be disobeyed by any mortal ruler. Priam prepared for his journey with the solemnity of a man attending his own funeral. He bathed and dressed in his finest robes. He prayed to Zeus for protection on this desperate mission. Hermes guided the old king's path through the Greek sentries who might have killed him instantly. The messenger god made the guards drowsy so they would not notice the Trojan wagon passing. Divine favour protected Priam until he reached Achilles' tent. The confrontation between aged king and young warrior created one of the war's most emotionally powerful moments. Priam threw himself at Achilles' feet and kissed the hands that had killed so many of his sons. He begged, as a father, appealing to another father's heart. The old king's words struck deep into Achilles' soul. Priam spoke of his own father Peleus, who waited anxiously for news from Troy. He reminded the hero that all mortal men faced the same fate regardless of their strength or courage. Death came to kings and warriors alike. Achilles wept as he recognized the shared humanity that connected him to his enemy. Divine rage gave way to mortal compassion as he helped the old king to his feet. For the first time since Patroclus died, the greatest warrior remembered his gentle nature. The hero agreed to return Hector's body in exchange for appropriate ransom. But more importantly, he offered the respect that one noble soul owed another. Their brief conversation transcended the hatred that had divided their peoples for 10 years. Achilles personally lifted Hector's corpse onto Priam's wagon and covered it with fine cloth. He handled the body gently, as if caring for his own fallen friend. Divine preservation had kept the prince beautiful despite days of abuse. The temporary truce allowed both sides to bury their dead with proper ceremonies. Funeral pyres burned throughout the plain, as warriors received the honour they had earned through courage. The smell of burning wood and flesh filled the air. Hector's funeral became Troy's greatest ceremony of mourning. The entire city participated in lamenting their greatest defender's death. Helen herself wept for the man who had always treated her with courtesy, despite the war she had caused. The truce lasted exactly as long as both kings had agreed. When the funeral rites ended, warfare resumed with unchanged bitterness. But something essential had shifted in both camps' understanding of their shared mortality and common grief. Priam returned to his palace carrying precious memories of his final meeting with his greatest son. The old king had found closure that would help him face the disasters still to come. His courage in seeking peace had honoured both sides' humanity. Troy's desperate situation after Hector's death demanded new heroes to inspire continued resistance. The city's allies responded with fresh champions whose courage might restore hope to the failing cause. But these new defenders would only add to the war's mounting tragedy. Penthesilea arrived from the distant Amazon kingdom leading 12 warrior maidens renowned for their skill in battle. This daughter of Ares possessed beauty that rivaled Helen's, alongside martial prowess that matched any male hero. Her presence electrified Troy's defenders with renewed confidence. The Amazon queen had come to Troy seeking glorious death in battle. She had accidentally killed her sister Hippolyte during a hunt, and needed purification through heroic deeds. War offered the redemption she sought while serving Troy's desperate needs. Penthesleia's fighting style differed completely from traditional heroic combat. She fought from horseback with bow and spear, striking swiftly and retreating before enemies could respond. Her mobility confused Greek warriors trained for close-quarters combat. The Queen's initial successes restored Trojan morale that had crumbled after Hector's death. Her mounted archers struck Greek formations like lightning, creating chaos that allowed traditional infantry to press attacks. For brief moments, victory seemed possible again, but Achilles inevitably encountered this new threat to Greek supremacy. The greatest warrior felt insulted that enemies would send a woman to fight against him. His divine nature recoiled from combat with any female opponent, however skilled she might be. Their duel proceeded with tragic inevitability as superior skill overcame courage and determination. Penthesileia fought magnificently, but no mortal could match Achilles' supernatural abilities. His spear found its mark despite her desperate attempts at defense. The Amazon Queen's beauty struck Achilles most powerfully as she lay dying from his wound. Her courage in facing certain death enhanced features that war paint had previously disguised. The hero fell in love with his victim as her life ebbed away. Achilles' grief and guilt over killing such magnificence added new dimensions to his already complex psychology. He had destroyed something precious and irreplaceable in the world. Victory felt more like defeat than triumph. Thersites mocked Achilles for showing weakness over a fallen enemy's beauty. This ugly and cowardly Greek soldier had always resented heroic pretensions. His crude jokes about the hero's feelings proved too insulting to bear. Achilles killed Thersites with a single blow for his insolence. This action created dissension among the Greeks who felt that common soldiers deserved protection from heroic anger. The army's unity began fragmenting under the stress of prolonged warfare. Memnon of Ethiopia arrived at Troy leading fresh troops from distant Africa. This son of Eos, the dawn goddess, brought exotic weapons and fighting techniques that renewed hope among the defenders. His divine parentage made him a worthy opponent for Achilles himself. The Ethiopian prince possessed beauty that earned him the epithet black but comely from ancient poets. His dark skin gleamed like polished bronze in sunlight. His equipment rivaled Achilles' divine panoply in magnificence and effectiveness. Memnon's arrival created the war's most evenly matched confrontation between opposing champions. Both heroes enjoyed divine parentage and supernatural protection. Both fought with skills that surpassed ordinary mortal capabilities. Victory would depend on minute advantages. Their duel became an epic encounter that lasted from dawn until sunset. Neither hero could gain decisive advantage over the other. Their divine mothers watched anxiously from Olympus as their sons fought for glory and survival. Eventually, Achilles' greater experience and superior equipment determined the outcome. His spear found a gap in Memnon's armor that mortal eyes could barely detect. The Ethiopian prince fell with honor intact despite his defeat. Eos mourned her son's death with tears that still fall as morning dew. The dawn goddess had watched helplessly as fate claimed another noble hero. Her grief rivaled Thetis' sorrow for Achilles' approaching doom. Memnon's death broke the last significant resistance that Troy could offer. No other champion remained who could challenge Achilles effectively. The city's fate seemed sealed unless divine intervention changed the war's trajectory. The mounting casualties among heroic champions on both sides revealed warfare's ultimate futility. Each death removed nobility and courage from the world, without advancing either side's cause significantly. The gods themselves began questioning this destructive conflict. The prophecy that had haunted Achilles throughout his brief life finally approached fulfillment as the war entered its final phase. Hector's death had completed the hero's quest for vengeance, but divine fate demanded that the killer follow his victim to the underworld. The greatest warrior's doom approached with every battle. Paris and Apollo had waited patiently for their opportunity to strike down Greece's mightiest champion. The god of archery guided the Trojan prince's arrows with supernatural accuracy. Together they would accomplish what no mortal had managed in 10 years of warfare. The fatal encounter occurred during fighting near Troy's Scaean Gate, where the city's main entrance provided access to the plain. Achilles led another assault against the walls, seeking to break Troy's defences through pure aggression. His divine armour blazed like fire in the sunlight. Paris positioned himself on the gate's tower with his bow drawn and arrow nocked. Apollo stood beside him invisibly, preparing to guide the shot that would change history. The god had not forgotten Achilles' insults to his servants in sacred places. The arrow flew with divine precision toward the only vulnerable spot on Achilles' body. His heel, where Thetis had held him during his infancy, remained unprotected by the river Styx's power. Mortal flesh offered no resistance to the bronze point. Achilles felt the arrow strike, but initially ignored what seemed like a minor wound. He had suffered countless injuries during his career without serious consequences. Divine invulnerability had made him careless about protecting himself completely, but poison on the arrowhead began spreading through his blood immediately. Some sources claimed Paris had dipped the point in the Hydra's venom. Others suggested divine magic enhanced the weapon's lethality. The cause mattered less than the inevitable result. The great warrior's strength ebbed as toxins overcame his supernatural constitution. He staggered and fell to his knees while Trojan defenders cheered from their walls. Greece's champion was finally vulnerable to mortal weapons and mortal death. Ajax the Greater fought desperately to protect his fallen comrade from Trojan attempts to capture the body. The massive warrior's shield created an impenetrable barrier, while other heroes carried Achilles to safety. They would not allow enemies to desecrate Greece's greatest hero. Achilles died in his tent surrounded by his closest companions. The Myrmidons wailed in grief that could be heard throughout both camps. Their invincible leader had proven mortal after all. The foundations of Greek confidence crumbled with their champion's death. Thetis emerged from the sea depths with her sister Nereids to mourn her son's passing. The sea nymph's lamentations created storms that lashed both land and sea. Divine grief expressed itself through natural forces that reflected cosmic sorrow. Achilles' funeral became the war's most magnificent ceremony. Both armies observed a lengthy truce while Greece honoured its greatest warrior. The pyre burned for 17 days as heroes competed in games, celebrating the dead champion's achievements. The funeral games included chariot racing, boxing, wrestling and archery contests. Prizes worthy of kings rewarded victorious competitors. These celebrations transformed grief into admiration for heroic excellence that death could not diminish. But the funeral's aftermath created new problems that threatened Greek unity. Achilles' divine armour became the subject of bitter dispute between Ajax and Odysseus. Both heroes claimed the right to inherit their comrade's most precious possessions. The argument over the armour revealed deeper tensions about the nature of heroic excellence. Ajax represented traditional warrior virtues of strength and courage. Odysseus embodied intellectual qualities that were becoming increasingly important in warfare. Agamemnon appointed Trojan prisoners as judges to avoid favoritism among Greek leaders. This decision seemed fair but proved controversial when the captives praised Odysseus's contributions over Ajax's more obvious heroism. The judgment awarding the armour to Odysseus created lasting resentment that would destroy one of Greece's greatest heroes. Ajax could not accept that cunning had triumphed over courage in determining heroic worth. His pride would not allow such humiliation. Achilles' death removed the war's most dynamic element and changed its entire character. The conflict became more strategic and less dependent on individual heroics. Victory would require planning and deception rather than pure martial prowess. The psychological impact of losing their greatest champion demoralized Greek forces more than any military defeat. Warriors who had followed Achilles through impossible dangers now questioned their chances of ultimate success. Fear replaced confidence throughout their ranks. Yet the war continued because too much had been invested to abandon the cause. 10 years of sacrifice demanded some form of resolution. The expedition would find other ways to achieve victory without their superhuman champion. The judgment awarding Achilles' armour to Odysseus struck Ajax the Greater like a physical blow to his heart. This massive warrior had devoted his life to protecting Greek forces through courage and strength. His reward was public humiliation that seemed to deny everything he represented. Ajax had fought beside Achilles throughout the war without seeking personal glory or material rewards. He asked only for recognition of his loyal service and heroic achievements. The armor represented acknowledgement that his contributions had value equal to any other hero's. The decision in Odysseus's favor suggested that intelligence mattered more than courage in determining heroic worth. Ajax could not accept this judgment without abandoning his core beliefs about honor and excellence. His entire identity depended on physical prowess being respected. Divine madness struck the great warrior as he brooded over his perceived injustice. Athena clouded his mind with visions that transformed friends into enemies. The goddess wanted to prevent him from harming innocent people during his rage. Ajax saw Agamemnon, Menelaus, and Odysseus, where only cattle grazed in the darkness. His diseased imagination convinced him that these shapes were his tormentors, come to mock his humiliation. He drew his sword to exact the vengeance that honor demanded. The maddened hero slaughtered sheep and cattle throughout the night, believing he was killing the men who had dishonored him. He captured the largest ram and tortured it as if it were Odysseus himself. His rage knew no limits in its quest for satisfaction. Dawn revealed the true extent of Ajax's madness to the horrified Greek army. Dead animals littered the plain around his tent. Blood covered the great warrior from head to foot. His wild eyes showed no recognition of reality. Tecmessa, Ajax's captive concubine, tried desperately to restore his sanity through gentle words and loving care. She reminded him of their son Eurystheus and his responsibilities as a father, but madness had severed his connections to ordinary human concerns. Gradually Ajax's divine affliction lifted and revealed the horrible truth of his actions. He saw dead sheep where he had imagined slain enemies. The great warrior realized that he had been reduced to slaughtering helpless animals in his rage. The shame of this revelation proved more unbearable than any physical pain Ajax had ever endured. He had become a laughingstock whose madness would be remembered longer than his heroic deeds. Death seemed preferable to such humiliation. Ajax's famous soliloquy revealed the depths of his despair and the nobility that remained despite his temporary madness. He could not live knowing that his reputation had been destroyed through his own actions. Honor demanded that he restore dignity through suicide. The great warrior planted his sword in the earth with its point upward. This weapon had been a gift from Hector after their memorable duel ended in friendship rather than death. Now it would provide the means for Ajax's escape from unbearable shame. Ajax threw himself upon the sword with all his massive strength. The bronze point pierced his heart and granted the death he sought. His blood flowed onto the ground that had witnessed so many of his heroic achievements. Tecmessa discovered her lord's body and raised lamentations that brought the entire Greek army running. The loss of another great hero stunned men already demoralized by Achilles' death. Their strongest defenders were disappearing one by one. Agamemnon initially refused to allow proper burial for a hero who had died by his own hand. Suicide violated divine law and dishonored the gods who gave life. But Odysseus argued that Ajax's past services deserved recognition despite his final act. The debate over Ajax's burial revealed the expedition's fracturing unity and declining morale. Heroes who had once cooperated smoothly now argued bitterly over basic principles. The stress of prolonged warfare was destroying their bonds of fellowship. Eventually, compromise allowed Ajax to receive funeral rites appropriate to his heroic status. His son Eurystheus would inherit his father's kingdom and carry on the family name. Death had restored the dignity that madness had temporarily stolen. Ajax's suicide removed another pillar supporting Greek confidence in ultimate victory. The army had now lost its two greatest warriors through death and madness. Remaining heroes wondered who would be next to fall victim to this cursed war. The great warrior's fate demonstrated that even the noblest heroes could be destroyed by forces beyond their control. Divine madness and wounded pride proved more dangerous than any Trojan weapon. Honor itself could become a trap for those who valued it too highly. Troy's fate remained unclear despite the deaths of its greatest defender and his principal opponent. The war had claimed heroes from both sides without bringing decisive victory to either camp. New prophecies would reveal the specific conditions required for Greek triumph. Helenus, Priam's son who possessed the gift of prophecy, provided the crucial intelligence that would finally break the siege. This Trojan prince had quarrelled with his brother Paris over Helen's affections. His resentment made him vulnerable to Greek manipulation and capture. Odysseus and Diomedes seized Helenus during one of his solitary walks outside Troy's walls. The prince's prophetic abilities made him too valuable to kill despite his enemy status. His knowledge could provide the keys to victory that had eluded the Greeks for 10 years. Under interrogation, Helenus revealed the conditions that fate had established for Troy's fall. No amount of courage or military skill could overcome divine will, but specific requirements had to be fulfilled before victory became possible. The first condition involved Philoctetes and the bow of Heracles that he had inherited. This wounded hero remained abandoned on Lemnos where the Greeks had left him 9 years earlier. His divine weapon was essential for shooting Paris and ending the Trojan prince's charmed life. Helenus also revealed that Neoptolemus, son of dead Achilles, must participate in Troy's final capture. The young warrior possessed his father's divine weapons and inherited prowess. His presence would provide the supernatural strength needed to breach Troy's defences. The Palladium, a sacred statue of Athena that protected Troy, had to be stolen from the city's temple. This divine image guaranteed the city's survival as long as it remained within the walls. Its removal would lift Athena's protection and make conquest possible. These specific conditions gave the Greeks concrete objectives that could be achieved through planning and effort. Victory was no longer a matter of indefinite siege warfare, but of completing particular tasks that fate had ordained. The mission to retrieve Philoctetes required delicate diplomacy to overcome the archer's justified resentment. Odysseus and Neoptolemus sailed to Lemnos, where they found the abandoned hero living in a cave. His wound had never healed, and his bitterness toward his former comrades remained intense. Neoptolemus felt genuine sympathy for Philoctetes' suffering and wanted to help heal the festering wound. The young hero possessed his father's divine medicines and the compassion that Achilles had sometimes shown. His sincerity overcame the archer's initial suspicion. Philoctetes agreed to return to Troy on condition that his contributions be properly acknowledged. He would not allow the Greeks to exploit his services without granting him the honour he deserved. His terms were accepted eagerly by leaders desperate for his assistance. The archer's divine bow proved its worth immediately upon his return to the war. His first shots killed Paris and several other Trojan champions. The weapon that had belonged to Heracles never missed its intended target. Divine accuracy made victory inevitable. The theft of the Palladium required Odysseus's special talents for infiltration and deception. He disguised himself as a beggar and entered Troy during darkness. His intelligence network had identified the statue's location and the guard's routine. Diomedes accompanied Odysseus on this crucial mission, providing military support while the master spy handled the actual theft. Their cooperation demonstrated how different heroic skills could be combined for maximum effectiveness. The mission succeeded perfectly as the two heroes escaped with the sacred image that had protected Troy for generations. Athena's favour now shifted completely to the Greek cause. The city's divine protection had been removed through mortal cunning. News of the Palladium's theft devastated Trojan morale while encouraging Greek confidence. Everyone understood that the gods had abandoned Troy to its fate. Continued resistance seemed pointless against such overwhelming divine opposition. But Troy's walls remained physically intact despite the loss of supernatural protection. The Greeks still needed a way to breach defences that had withstood 10 years of siege. Military engineering rather than divine intervention would determine the final outcome. The stage was set for Odysseus's masterpiece of strategic deception. All the conditions for victory had been fulfilled. The time had come for the stratagem that would finally bring down the walls that had defied the world's greatest army. The idea came to Odysseus during his darkest hour of contemplation about their seemingly hopeless situation. 10 years of siege had failed to breach Troy's mighty walls. Direct assault was impossible. Starvation would take decades. Only deception could achieve what force had failed to accomplish. The master strategist remembered stories of gifts that concealed armed men inside enemy cities. Ancient legends told of hollow statues and containers that transported warriors past defensive barriers. These tales inspired his greatest and most audacious plan. Odysseus proposed constructing a massive wooden horse that could contain elite warriors in its hollow belly. This tribute would supposedly honor Athena and mark the Greeks' abandonment of their futile siege. The Trojans might bring this gift inside their walls to celebrate victory. Many Greek leaders initially dismissed the plan as impossible fantasy. The horse would need to be enormous to hold enough warriors for effective action. Its construction would require master craftsmen and precious materials. The deception seemed too elaborate to succeed, but desperate circumstances made even fantastic schemes worth considering. Traditional siege warfare had accomplished nothing except massive casualties on both sides. The wooden horse offered hope, where conventional tactics promised only continued stalemate. Epeius volunteered to build the horse using skills inherited from generations of master craftsmen. This artisan possessed knowledge of architecture, engineering, and decorative arts. His family had built temples and palaces throughout Greece. No one was better qualified for this project. The construction began in secret using timber from the sacred grove of Ida. Massive beams formed the horse's internal framework, while carefully fitted planks created its external appearance. Divine inspiration guided Epeius's hands as he crafted this instrument of Troy's doom. The horse's exterior bore decorations that proclaimed its religious purpose. Intricate carvings depicted Athena's victories and celebrated her wisdom. Precious metals and ivory enhanced details that proclaimed this as the finest offering ever created for the goddess. Inside, skilled carpentry created compartments that could hold 30 warriors plus their weapons and supplies. Ventilation holes disguised as decorative elements provided air for the hidden men. Every detail reflected Epeius's genius for combining artistry with practical function. Selection of the warriors who would hide inside the horse required careful consideration of courage, skill, and ability to remain silent for extended periods. These men would face death if discovered prematurely. Only the most trusted heroes could be chosen for this desperate gamble. Odysseus naturally claimed leadership of the expedition inside the horse. His plan required his personal supervision to ensure proper execution. The master strategist would not entrust such crucial responsibility to any subordinate. Menelaus insisted on participating despite his age and royal status. This was his war, fought to recover his stolen wife. He deserved the honor of being present when Troy finally fell. His inclusion strengthened the mission's legitimacy. Diomedes, Neoptolemus, and other proven champions completed the roster of hidden warriors. These heroes represented Greece's finest military talent. Their combined skills would be irresistible once they emerged inside Troy's walls. The deception required the apparent departure of the entire Greek fleet to make the horse's abandonment credible. Ships sailed beyond the horizon, but anchored behind nearby Tenedos Island. They would return at the agreed signal to complete Troy's conquest. Sinon, a Greek warrior chosen for his acting ability and resemblance to local slaves, remained behind to provide credible testimony about the horse's purpose. He would claim to be a deserter fleeing Greek cruelty. His story would convince skeptical Trojans to accept the gift. The plan's success depended on psychological manipulation as much as physical deception. The Trojans needed to believe that their enemies had finally acknowledged defeat. Victory's intoxication would overcome natural caution about accepting suspicious gifts. Divine intervention supported the stratagem through Athena's favour. The goddess, who had been insulted by Paris's judgment, would see justice done through this clever ruse. Her wisdom inspired human intelligence to achieve what strength could not accomplish. Every detail was planned with obsessive care. The horse's size had to seem impressive without being impossibly large. Its decoration must proclaim religious significance while concealing military purpose. Success required perfect execution of an incredibly complex deception. The wooden horse represented everything that Odysseus embodied as a hero. Intelligence triumphed over strength. Planning overcame improvisation. Patience achieved what haste had failed to accomplish. The master strategist's greatest victory lay within reach. The massive wooden horse stood alone on the plain where the Greek army had camped for 10 years. Its polished sides gleamed in the morning sunlight while its noble head gazed toward Troy's walls. The sight filled Trojan hearts with wonder and suspicion in equal measure. Laocoon, priest of Apollo, voiced the doubts that many Trojans felt about this mysterious gift. His experience serving the god of prophecy had taught him to distrust appearances. The sudden Greek departure seemed too convenient to be genuine. The priest's famous warning echoed across the plain with prophetic authority. "I fear the Greeks, especially when they bring gifts." His words expressed the wisdom of generations who had learned that enemies' generosity usually concealed hostile intentions. Laocoon argued passionately that the horse should be burned or cast into the sea. Its enormous size suggested hidden purposes that could threaten Troy's security. No gift from enemies deserved admission within the city's protective walls. To demonstrate his convictions, the priest hurled his spear at the horse's wooden flank. The bronze point struck with a hollow sound that suggested empty space within. This evidence should have confirmed his suspicions about concealed warriors inside, but divine intervention prevented the Trojans from heeding Laocoon's wise counsel. 2 enormous serpents emerged from the sea and approached the group near the horse. These creatures moved with supernatural purpose toward the priest and his 2 young sons. The serpents seized Laocoon and his children in their coils before anyone could react. Their massive strength crushed the life from all 3 victims, while horrified witnesses watched helplessly. The priest's warnings died with him in apparent divine punishment. Most Trojans interpreted the serpent's attack as proof that Laocoon had offended the gods by opposing their gift. They believed that divine anger had struck down the priest for his impiety. The horse must truly be sacred if heaven protected it so violently. Only a few observers noticed that the serpent slithered away toward Athena's temple after completing their deadly work. These witnesses might have recognized divine manipulation, but fear kept them silent. No one wanted to risk sharing Laocoon's fate. Cassandra arrived at the scene as workers prepared to move the horse into the city. The prophetic princess had foreseen this moment in her dreams. She knew exactly what disaster lay hidden within the wooden belly. The cursed prophetess spoke with absolute certainty about the horse's true purpose. Greek warriors waited inside to open Troy's gates for their returning army. The gift would bring destruction more complete than 10 years of siege had accomplished. Her warnings possessed the clarity and detail that always mark true prophecy. She described the hidden warriors by name and predicted the specific manner of Troy's fall. Every word carried the authority of divine revelation. But Apollo's curse ensured that no one believed Cassandra's accurate predictions. Her fellow Trojans dismissed her warnings as the ravings of a madwoman. They had heard her prophecies too often to take them seriously now. Some citizens felt sympathy for the princess whose gift brought only sorrow. They pitied her obvious distress, but could not accept her dire predictions. The curse that gave her knowledge while denying her credibility worked perfectly. The debate between caution and celebration raged throughout the day as Trojans argued about the horse's fate. Practical voices urged destroying the suspicious gift. Enthusiastic citizens demanded bringing it inside to honor the gods properly. Religious considerations eventually tipped the balance toward accepting the horse. Troy's priests declared that refusing a sacred offering would anger Athena. The goddess's favor was too precious to risk through excessive suspicion. The decision to admit the horse reflected war weariness as much as religious devotion. 10 years of siege had exhausted Troy's people emotionally and physically. They desperately wanted to believe that victory had finally arrived. Hope overcame prudence as celebrations began throughout the city. Citizens decorated their homes and prepared feast tables. Children sang songs of victory while adults planned Thanksgiving ceremonies. Joy drowned out the few remaining voices of caution. The wooden horse would enter Troy not through force but through invitation. The city's defenders would breach their own walls to admit the instrument of their destruction. Divine irony reached its perfect culmination. The celebration of apparent Greek defeat transformed Troy into a city mad with joy. Citizens who had endured 10 years of siege could barely believe their ordeal was ending. Streets filled with dancing crowds while wine flowed freely from royal storehouses opened for the occasion. The Scaean gate proved too narrow to admit the massive wooden horse without modifications. Trojan workers enthusiastically tore down sections of their defensive wall to create an opening large enough for this sacred gift. They destroyed their own protection willingly. Teams of oxen dragged the horse slowly through Troy's streets, while citizens threw flowers and sang hymns of thanksgiving. Children ran alongside the procession, touching the polished wood for luck. Elders wept with relief that their suffering was finally over. The horse's destination was Athena's temple at the city's highest point. This sacred space would provide appropriate honor for an offering dedicated to the goddess of wisdom. The placement also gave the hidden warriors perfect position for their mission. Helen watched the procession from her palace window with emotions she could not name. 10 years of war had begun because of her beauty. Now it would end through this magnificent gift. She felt both relief and inexplicable dread. As darkness fell, Helen walked through the city's celebration with Paris at her side. They approached the wooden horse and stood in its shadow, while festivities continued around them. Some impulse drove her to test the gift that had brought such joy. Helen circled the horse 3 times while calling the names of Greek heroes in voices that mimicked their wives' tones. Her divine nature sensed the hidden warriors within and compelled her to this dangerous game. She called to Odysseus in Penelope's voice, to Diomedes as his wife might speak. The warriors inside the horse felt their hearts leap as familiar voices seemed to call their names. Some nearly answered before Odysseus pressed his hands firmly over their mouths. The master strategist recognized Helen's supernatural game and its lethal implications. Anticlus almost betrayed their presence by responding to what seemed like his wife's desperate plea. Only Odysseus's physical restraint prevented discovery that would have doomed them all. The moment passed as Helen completed her circuit and moved away. The hidden Greeks endured hours of agonizing suspense as Troy's celebration continued around them. They could hear music, laughter, and drunken revelry through the horse's wooden walls. Every sound might herald discovery and death. Gradually exhaustion and wine overcame the celebrating citizens. Streets that had teemed with revellers grew quiet as Troy's people sought their beds. The city that had known only vigilance for 10 years finally slept without guards or caution. The wooden horse stood silent in Athena's temple while Troy slumbered in peaceful exhaustion. Citizens dreamed of reconstruction and normal life. They imagined their children growing up without war's constant threat. Peace seemed to have returned at last. Inside the horse, 30 Greek warriors waited with weapons ready and hearts pounding. They had endured cramped quarters and stifling heat for hours. Now the moment approached when they would either win immortal glory or die ignominiously trapped in their wooden prison. Odysseus listened carefully to determine when Troy's sleep was deepest. His experienced ear detected the subtle changes in sound that indicated the city's vulnerability. The master strategist would choose the perfect moment for emergence. The moon reached its zenith as Odysseus judged conditions optimal for their desperate gambit. He signalled his companions to prepare for the action that would determine Troy's fate. 10 years of siege would be decided in the next few hours. The city's final night of independence was ending. Dawn would bring either Greek victory or Trojan awareness of the deception. The wooden horse that stood innocently in Athena's temple would soon reveal its true and terrible purpose. Midnight's darkness cloaked Troy in deceptive peace as Odysseus finally judged the moment right for action. The master strategist opened the hidden door in the horse's belly and lowered a rope into Athena's temple. 30 Greek warriors descended silently into the heart of their enemy's city. Each hero carried weapons chosen for close combat in narrow streets. Swords and daggers would serve better than spears in the fighting to come. They moved like shadows through the temple, their bronze armour muffled by cloth wrappings. The first objective was opening Troy's main gate to admit the returning army. Odysseus led half the warriors toward this crucial target, while Diomedes commanded the others in securing the citadel. Speed and surprise would determine success or failure. Sinon had already lit the signal fire that called the Greek fleet back from Tenedos. Ships approached Troy's harbour with oars muffled and sails furled. The main army would arrive within hours if the gates could be opened. Trojan sentries died at their posts before they could raise alarms. Greek daggers found throats and hearts with practiced precision. Years of warfare had taught these skills that served them now in this desperate hour. The massive bars securing Troy's gates required combined effort to lift. Bronze and oak that had protected the city for centuries now yielded to enemies working from within. The great portal swung open to admit destruction. Greek forces poured through the breached defences like a flood through broken dikes. Warriors who had waited 10 years for this moment showed no mercy to sleeping enemies. Troy would pay in blood for every year of siege. House-to-house fighting erupted as Trojan citizens awakened to find enemies in their bedrooms. Men grabbed whatever weapons they could find while women and children fled screaming through smoke-filled streets. The city became a maze of individual battles. Flames spread rapidly as the Greeks systematically burned Troy's neighbourhoods. Fire provided light for their work while preventing organised resistance. The city that had defied them so long would be reduced to ashes. Astyanax, Hector's infant son, posed a future threat that Greek pragmatism could not ignore. This child might grow up seeking vengeance for his family and city. Odysseus ordered him thrown from Troy's highest tower, despite pleas for mercy. The systematic slaughter continued as Greek settled scores accumulated over 10 years of warfare. They remembered every fallen comrade and every moment of danger. Revenge drove them beyond normal limits of human behaviour. Women and children became prizes to be divided among the victorious warriors. Queens and princesses faced slavery in foreign lands. Helen herself awaited judgment from the husband she'd abandoned so many years earlier. Menelaus found his wife cowering in Aphrodite's temple, still beautiful despite her terror. His rage melted when he saw her divine loveliness again. Love conquered anger, as it had throughout this war. Aeneas escaped the burning city carrying his aged father Anchises on his shoulders. The Dardanian prince also bore the sacred objects that would establish Troy's legacy in distant lands. Destiny preserved him for future greatness. Cassandra was dragged from Athena's temple by Ajax the Lesser, who violated both sanctuary and the prophetess's sacred status. This crime would bring divine punishment upon the Greeks, despite their victory. The division of spoils proceeded according to strict protocols that prevented fighting among the victors. Each hero received rewards proportionate to his contributions during the long siege. Troy's treasures brought peace among the coalition. The city's destruction continued for days as Greeks methodically demolished every structure. They wanted no stone left upon stone that might provide foundation for Troy's rebuilding. The great city would disappear from the earth. But divine justice was already preparing punishment for the victors' excessive cruelty. The gods who had supported their cause now turned against warriors who violated sacred laws. The destruction of Troy would bring its own terrible consequences. The sack ended with Troy reduced to smoking ruins and its people dead or enslaved. The great city that had commanded the trade routes between Europe and Asia existed only in memory. Greek victory was complete but costly beyond calculation. The wooden horse stood empty in Athena's ruined temple, its purpose fulfilled and its fame secured forever. This masterpiece of deception would be remembered long after its creators were forgotten. Odysseus's greatest stratagem had succeeded beyond his boldest hopes. The gods who had watched Troy's destruction with satisfaction soon turned their eyes toward the victor's crimes. Divine justice operated by laws that mortals rarely understood completely. Victory in war did not grant immunity from punishment for violating sacred principles. Athena's rage burned hottest against Ajax the Lesser for his assault on Cassandra in her temple. The virgin goddess protected all sacred spaces, especially those dedicated to her worship. Rape within temple walls violated both human decency and divine law simultaneously. The prophetess had clung to Athena's wooden statue seeking sanctuary that should have been inviolable. Ajax dragged her away from the altar despite her appeals to divine protection. His lust overcame both religious reverence and basic humanity. The goddess's wooden image fell during the struggle, an omen that should have warned Ajax of supernatural anger. Divine signs meant nothing to a warrior consumed by base desires. He completed his crime while heaven watched with growing fury. Other violations accumulated as Greek warriors celebrated their victory without proper respect for divine authority. They murdered suppliants at altars. They defiled sacred vessels. They showed no mercy to priests who had served the gods faithfully. The desecration of Apollo's temple particularly angered the god of prophecy and healing. Greek soldiers stripped golden ornaments from his altar. They killed his priests for defending sacred property. Such crimes demanded swift and terrible punishment. Zeus himself grew disgusted with the excessive brutality that accompanied Troy's fall. The king of gods had supported Greek victory, but not the savagery that followed. Divine justice required balance that mortals had abandoned completely. The storm that struck the homebound Greek fleet manifested divine wrath in its most destructive form. Winds howled with supernatural fury while waves rose higher than mountains. Thunder crashed continuously as lightning split the darkness. Ships that had survived 10 years of war were smashed like toys against rocky shores. Warriors who had conquered Troy drowned helplessly in the wine-dark sea. Their bronze armor pulled them down into watery graves. Ajax the Lesser perished when Poseidon's trident split the rock where he had sought refuge. The sea god would not allow this criminal to escape divine punishment through human efforts. Justice demanded death for temple violation. Many vessels were scattered across the Mediterranean by winds that blew from every direction simultaneously. Ships lost sight of their companions in the supernatural tempest. The unified fleet that had conquered Troy dissolved into isolated survivors. Some Greeks found themselves cast upon shores inhabited by hostile peoples who had supported Troy. These strangers showed no mercy to shipwrecked enemies. Divine irony ensured that conquerors became victims. The few ships that reached friendly harbours carried news of the fleet's destruction. Families who had celebrated Troy's fall now mourned sons and husbands claimed by divine anger. Victory's joy transformed quickly into grief. Those heroes who survived the storm faced long delays in reaching their homes. Divine punishment extended their suffering through years of wandering. They learned that the gods' justice operated on scales that mortals could barely comprehend. The pattern of suffering following victory revealed divine displeasure with excessive violence. Wars might be necessary, but unnecessary cruelty brought punishment upon victors and vanquished alike. Heaven demanded restraint even in triumph. Greek poets would remember this lesson in later generations. Their songs warned that divine justice pursued wrongdoers regardless of their earthly success. No victory could protect criminals from supernatural retribution. The scattered homecomings became individual stories of struggle and redemption. Each hero faced challenges designed to test his character and purify his spirit. Divine education operated through hardship and delay. Clytemnestra had spent 10 years preparing for her husband's return from Troy. The queen's grief over Iphigenia's sacrifice had transformed into cold fury that time could not diminish. She planned revenge with the same careful attention that Agamemnon gave to military campaigns. Aegisthus proved a willing accomplice in the queen's scheme for vengeance. This son of Thyestes carried his own grudge against the house of Atreus. The ancient curse that had plagued Agamemnon's family found perfect expression through his collaboration. The usurper had ruled Mycenae effectively during the king's absence. His administration won support from nobles who resented Agamemnon's autocratic style. Many citizens preferred Aegisthus's gentler approach to governance. Clytemnestra and Aegisthus became lovers as well as conspirators. Their relationship combined personal passion with political calculation. Together, they commanded resources necessary to eliminate the returning king. Watchmen posted on distant hills announced Agamemnon's approach weeks before his actual arrival. The royal couple used this time to perfect their preparations. Every detail was planned with murderous precision. The queen ordered her servants to prepare a royal welcome worthy of Troy's conqueror. She would greet her husband as a devoted wife celebrating his glorious return. The deception had to be perfect to succeed. Purple tapestries were spread from the palace gates to the throne room. This crimson carpet symbolized royal dignity, while concealing the blood that would soon be spilled. The color proved prophetically appropriate. Agamemnon's chariot approached the palace amid crowds of cheering citizens. The king looked magnificent in his golden armor, with Troy's treasures displayed around him. Victory had enhanced his natural majesty. Cassandra accompanied the king as his captive concubine. The prophetic princess sensed the doom awaiting in the palace, but her curse ensured that no one believed her warnings. She watched helplessly as tragedy approached. Clytemnestra embraced her husband with apparent joy while privately savouring the moment she had anticipated for years. Her performance convinced observers that marital love had survived their long separation. None suspected her true intentions. The queen insisted that Agamemnon walk on the purple carpet to honour his achievements. She argued that Troy's conqueror deserved such recognition. Her husband initially refused, knowing that such display suggested divine pretensions. Eventually Clytemnestra's persuasion overcame Agamemnon's reluctance. The king removed his sandals and walked barefoot on the precious fabric. He entered his palace literally treading on royal purple. The bath chamber had been prepared as the actual scene of murder. Heated water and perfumed oils created an atmosphere of luxury and relaxation. The king would die at the moment of greatest vulnerability. Clytemnestra assisted her husband personally, dismissing servants who might have interfered with her plans. She helped him remove his armor and clothing. Her gentle ministrations concealed deadly intentions. The net that trapped Agamemnon had been woven specially for this purpose. Its strong cords made escape impossible once it was cast over the king's naked body. He struggled helplessly against bonds that held him fast. Aegisthus struck the first blow with an axe that split Agamemnon's skull. The usurper claimed the honour of killing his family's ancient enemy. Blood spattered the bath chamber's marble walls in crimson streams. Clytemnestra delivered the final stroke with a sword that pierced her husband's heart. She wanted personal satisfaction for Iphigenia's murder. The queen's vengeance was complete at last. The royal couple displayed Agamemnon's corpse publicly to justify their action. They claimed that divine justice had punished him for sacrificing his daughter. The curse of the house of Atreus had claimed another victim. Orestes, Agamemnon's son, was absent from Mycenae when his father died. The young prince had been sent away for safety, but he would return to continue the cycle of blood vengeance. The curse demanded satisfaction across generations. The pattern of crime and punishment that had plagued Agamemnon's ancestors would continue through his descendants. Divine justice operated through human agents who became victims of their own actions. The house of Atreus could find no peace. The storm that scattered the Greek fleet drove Menelaus and Helen far from their intended course home to Sparta. Divine winds carried them across the Mediterranean to shores they had never seen. Their return became an odyssey of 8 years' duration. Egypt provided their first refuge after surviving the supernatural tempest. The ancient kingdom offered hospitality to royal refugees while they recovered from their ordeal. Pharaoh's court welcomed the famous couple with appropriate honours. Helen's beauty impressed the Egyptians as much as it had captivated Greeks and Trojans. Courtiers competed to praise her divine perfection. Artists begged for the privilege of depicting her features in paintings and sculptures. but Helen's status remained ambiguous throughout their wanderings. Some people viewed her as an innocent victim of divine machinations. Others considered her a willing adulteress who had caused countless deaths. The truth lay somewhere between these extremes. Menelaus treated his wife with careful courtesy that revealed both lingering love and persistent doubt. He had fought 10 years to recover her, but questions remained about her feelings and motivations. Their relationship required gradual reconstruction. Divine intervention had clearly played a role in Helen's actions throughout the war. Aphrodite's power could not be resisted by mortal will alone. This supernatural influence provided some excuse for her apparent betrayal of marriage vows. Yet Helen had also made choices that suggested personal responsibility for the war's tragedy. She had helped Paris steal treasure from Menelaus's palace. She had lived willingly as the Trojan prince's wife for 10 years. Divine compulsion could not explain everything. The couple's discussions during their long journey gradually restored understanding between them. Menelaus learned to separate his wife from the mythical Helen, whose beauty had launched 1,000 ships. She was both symbol and woman simultaneously. Helen herself struggled with guilt over the destruction her beauty had caused. She had witnessed Troy's fall and its people's suffering. The knowledge that her face had inspired such devastation troubled her conscience deeply. Their travels took them to many lands where different cultures offered varying perspectives on their story. Some people celebrated Helen as a goddess of beauty. Others blamed her for war's tragedy. Fame brought both honor and condemnation. Gradually, Menelaus and Helen rediscovered the affection that had originally united them. Shared hardships during their wanderings rebuilt bonds that war had strained. They learned to value present happiness over past grievances. The couple's eventual return to Sparta marked the restoration of their marriage and royal authority. Citizens welcomed their king and queen with celebrations that lasted for days. The kingdom had prospered during their absence under capable regents. Helen resumed her duties as queen with grace that impressed all observers. She managed the palace household efficiently while supporting her husband's political decisions. Her wisdom and beauty enhanced Sparta's reputation throughout Greece. Their marriage became a model of reconciliation that inspired later generations. Love had triumphed over betrayal through patience and understanding. Divine beauty had finally found worthy expression in human happiness. The couple's peaceful later years provided a gentle conclusion to their tumultuous story. They ruled Sparta wisely until advanced age claimed them both. Their love story outlived the war that had tested it so severely. The cleverest of Greek heroes faced the longest and most perilous journey home as divine punishment for his role in Troy's destruction. Odysseus's intelligence had made him indispensable during the war, but the same cunning that had devised the wooden horse now attracted supernatural opposition. Poseidon bore special grudge against the hero who had blinded his son Polyphemus the Cyclops. The sea god commanded winds and waves that drove Odysseus far from his intended course. Divine anger would extend his voyage to 10 years' duration. The first stage of his odyssey brought encounters with supernatural beings who tested his courage and wisdom. Lotus eaters offered forgetfulness that would have ended his quest for home. Their enchanted fruit promised peace at the cost of memory and purpose. Circe the sorceress transformed his companions into swine before Odysseus could resist her magic. Only divine intervention through Hermes' protective herb allowed him to overcome her spells. The goddess became his ally after recognizing his supernatural favor. The hero's descent into Hades to consult the prophet Tiresias revealed the full extent of divine displeasure with Greek actions at Troy. The dead seer warned that only perfect compliance with divine will could ensure his eventual return home. Odysseus encountered the shades of fallen comrades during his underworld journey. Achilles declared that he would rather be a living slave than a dead king. This conversation revealed the ultimate futility of seeking glory through warfare. The sirens tested Odysseus's ability to resist temptation while satisfying his curiosity about forbidden knowledge. He heard their song while bound to his ship's mast. Their music promised wisdom at the price of death. Scylla and Charybdis forced the hero to choose between certain losses and total destruction. The six-headed monster devoured 6 crew members, while Odysseus steered away from the whirlpool's fatal embrace. Leadership required terrible decisions. The cattle of the sun offered final temptation that his starving crew could not resist despite clear warnings. Their disobedience brought divine punishment that destroyed everyone except Odysseus himself. Divine justice operated through natural consequences. Calypso's island provided 7 years of luxurious captivity that tested the hero's commitment to home and family. The immortal nymph offered eternal youth and divine love, yet Odysseus chose mortal happiness over supernatural gifts. Meanwhile, Penelope faced her own trials in Ithaca as suitors consumed her household's wealth, while pressuring her to remarry. Her faithfulness matched her husband's determination to return. Their love sustained both through years of separation. The contest of the bow finally revealed Odysseus's identity to his wife and enemies simultaneously. Only he could string his mighty weapon and shoot through 12 axe handles. Physical prowess combined with divine favour to demonstrate his rightful authority. The slaughter of the suitors restored Odysseus's control over his kingdom, while satisfying divine demands for justice. These parasites had violated hospitality laws and threatened legitimate royal authority. Their deaths purified Ithaca of corruption. The hero's reunion with Penelope required careful proof of identity that satisfied her cautious nature. Their shared knowledge of their bed's construction provided verification that no impostor could duplicate. Love and intelligence triumphed together. Odysseus's story became the archetypal tale of the wandering hero whose intelligence and perseverance overcome supernatural obstacles. His Odyssey demonstrated that divine punishment could be endured through courage, wisdom, and unwavering commitment to home and family. The pattern of suffering following victory that marked all Greek homecomings found its fullest expression in Odysseus's 10-year journey. Divine justice required that even the cleverest heroes pay for their crimes through extended hardship and loss. Not all of Troy's children perished in the flames that consumed their ancient city. Divine providence preserved certain survivors who would carry Trojan culture across the Mediterranean to establish new settlements. Their descendants would build civilizations that surpassed even their ancestors' achievements. Aeneas led the most significant group of refugees from burning Troy. The son of Aphrodite had received divine warnings to escape with the sacred objects that embodied his city's spiritual essence. The Palladium might be lost, but other relics remained to bless future generations. The Dardanian prince carried his aged father Anchises on his shoulders, while leading his young son Ascanius by the hand. This image of 3 generations united in flight became one of the war's most enduring symbols. Family duty transcended personal safety in the heroic code. The sacred pennants and other divine objects accompanied Aeneas's band of survivors. These treasures represented Troy's covenant with heaven that would continue in new lands. Divine favour followed the refugees despite their city's destruction. Aeneas's mother Aphrodite guided her son's wanderings through supernatural intervention. The goddess of love would not allow Troy's nobility to perish completely. Her protection ensured that Trojan virtues would find expression in future civilizations. The refugees' journey took them across the Aegean and through the western Mediterranean. They established temporary settlements in several locations before divine guidance led them to their destined homeland. Each stop prepared them for their ultimate mission. Sicily provided refuge where Trojan survivors mingled with local populations. Anchises died there after blessing his son's mission to establish a new Troy in distant lands. The old man's death marked the end of one era and the beginning of another. The survivors eventually reached Italy, where destiny awaited fulfillment. The Tiber River's mouth provided a harbour for their ships. The surrounding hills offered defensive positions suitable for a new city. Divine signs confirmed this location's appropriateness. Local Italian tribes initially resisted these foreign refugees who claimed divine mandate to settle in their territory. Warfare erupted as competing claims required resolution through battle. The survivors had to fight again for the right to build their new home. Aeneas's marriage to Lavinia, daughter of King Latinus, sealed the alliance between Trojans and Latins. This union blended two noble bloodlines while creating the ancestry of future Roman rulers. Love conquered political divisions as it had throughout this long story. The city of Lavinium became the first successful Trojan settlement in Italy. Its founding fulfilled divine prophecies while establishing the foundation for greater achievements to come. Troy's legacy would grow stronger through dispersion than it had been through concentration. Ascanius eventually established Alba Longa, which became the mother city of Rome itself. The dynasty founded by Aeneas's son would rule for centuries before giving birth to Romulus and Remus. Trojan blood would flow in the veins of Roman emperors. Other Trojan refugees scattered throughout the Mediterranean world, carrying their culture to distant shores. Some reached Spain and Gaul, others settled in Africa and Asia Minor. Each group preserved elements of their ancestral civilization. These dispersed communities maintained connections through shared stories and religious practices. They remembered their common origin in the great city that had commanded the Hellespont. Troy lived on in the hearts of her scattered children. Archaeological evidence suggests that Bronze Age refugees did indeed spread throughout the Mediterranean after the collapse of major cities. The legend of Trojan dispersion may preserve genuine historical memory of population movements during the late Bronze Age crisis. The survival of Trojan culture through displacement rather than direct continuity demonstrates how civilizations can transcend political destruction. Ideas and values proved more durable than walls and armies. Troy's true strength lay in her cultural achievements rather than military power. The Romans' claim to Trojan ancestry provided them with a noble genealogy that rivaled Greek pretensions to superiority. Through Aeneas, they connected themselves to the heroic age while establishing their right to rule the Mediterranean world. This Trojan legacy influenced Roman self-perception throughout their imperial expansion. They saw themselves as restoring Troy's glory through conquest of Greek cities. Historical irony allowed the defeated to triumph over their conquerors through cultural transformation. Homer's genius transformed the raw materials of legend into immortal poetry that has captivated audiences for nearly 3 millennia. The Iliad and Odyssey represent humanity's first great literary achievements, establishing patterns that continue to influence storytelling today. The ancient bard's method combined traditional oral poetry with revolutionary artistic vision. He inherited stories that had been passed down through generations of singers, but his treatment elevated familiar tales to unprecedented heights of literary excellence. Homer's psychological insight revealed the complex motivations that drove heroes to both noble and destructive actions. His characters possessed depth that made them seem like real people, rather than mythological figures. Their struggles reflected universal human experiences. The poet's treatment of divine intervention balanced supernatural elements with human agency. Gods influenced events without completely controlling mortal decisions. This tension between fate and free will created dramatic complexity that engaged audiences intellectually and emotionally. Homer's influence on subsequent Greek literature was immediate and profound. Tragic poets like Aeschylus drew directly on the epic tradition for their material. The Oresteia traced Agamemnon's murder and its consequences through 3 generations of the cursed house. Sophocles explored individual psychology within the framework of heroic legend. His Ajax portrayed the great warrior's madness and suicide with psychological realism that made ancient heroes relevant to contemporary audiences. Honor and shame drove characters to their destinies. Euripides questioned traditional heroic values through his innovative treatments of familiar stories. His Trojan women focused on war's impact on innocent victims rather than celebrating martial glory. The playwright's sympathy for suffering transcended national loyalties. Greek artists translated poetic inspiration into visual form through sculpture, painting, and pottery decoration. The war's episodes appeared on temple pediments and private drinking cups alike. Every social class could appreciate these familiar stories. Roman poets inherited the Greek tradition, but transformed it according to their own cultural values. Virgil's Aeneid retold the Trojan War from the perspective of the defeated, making refugees into heroes and conquerors into obstacles to destiny. The Roman epic emphasized duty and sacrifice for the common good rather than individual glory-seeking. Aeneas represented ideal leadership that placed collective welfare above personal desires. This message resonated with Roman imperial ideology. Medieval Europe rediscovered the Trojan War through Latin sources rather than Homer's original Greek. Authors like Dictys and Dares claimed to provide eyewitness accounts of the conflict. These fictitious works influenced medieval romances more than authentic classical texts. Courtly literature transformed ancient warriors into medieval knights, who fought for ladies' honour rather than political objectives. The matter of Troy became one of three great literary cycles that dominated medieval imagination, alongside Arthurian and Charlemagne legends. The Renaissance brought renewed interest in Homer's authentic voice through humanist scholarship. Greek manuscripts preserved in Byzantine libraries revealed the original power of ancient poetry. Scholars learned to distinguish between genuine classics and medieval imitations. Translation projects made Homer accessible to vernacular audiences throughout Europe. Each national literature developed its own relationship with the classical tradition. The Trojan War became part of every educated person's cultural inheritance. Modern literature has continued to find new meanings in these ancient stories. Authors from different cultures have retold the war from fresh perspectives that reflect contemporary concerns. Feminist writers have emphasized women's experiences, while post-colonial authors have questioned imperial narratives. Archaeological discoveries have provided new contexts for understanding literary treatments of the war. The recovery of Bronze Age Troy has allowed scholars to distinguish between historical elements and poetic invention. This has enhanced rather than diminished appreciation for Homer's achievement. Film and television have introduced Trojan War stories to mass audiences who might never read ancient poetry. These visual adaptations face the challenge of translating literary complexity into dramatic action while maintaining the source material's emotional power. The war's literary legacy demonstrates how great stories transcend their original historical contexts to speak to universal human concerns. Love and loss, honor and betrayal, victory and defeat remain relevant regardless of changing political circumstances. Homer's vision continues to illuminate the human condition. Heinrich Schliemann's passionate belief in Homer's historical accuracy drove him to seek the actual ruins of Troy in the hills of northwestern Turkey. This wealthy businessman turned amateur archaeologist would revolutionize understanding of Bronze Age civilization despite his crude excavation methods. Schliemann arrived at Hisarlik in 1871 with Homer's Iliad as his guide to the ancient landscape. He identified topographical features mentioned in the epic and began digging with more enthusiasm than scientific precision. His dramatic discoveries would capture the world's imagination. The excavator's greatest find was a treasure hoard that he immediately attributed to King Priam himself. Golden diadems, silver vessels, and bronze weapons seemed to confirm Homer's descriptions of Troy's wealth. The discovery made international headlines and established Schliemann's reputation. Later scholarship proved that Priam's treasure actually dated to Troy II, 1,000 years before the legendary war. Schliemann's hasty conclusions reflected his determination to vindicate Homer rather than careful analysis of archaeological evidence. But his discoveries reveal the site's genuine antiquity. Schliemann's crude methods destroyed much valuable evidence in his haste to reach what he considered the Homeric level. He bulldozed through later remains that might have provided crucial information about the city's development. Scientific archaeology was still in its infancy. Wilhelm Dörpfeld succeeded Schliemann and brought more systematic methods to the excavation. This trained architect documented the site's stratigraphy carefully and identified 9 distinct settlement levels. His work established Troy 6 as the most impressive Bronze Age city. Modern excavations under Manfred Kaufmann have revealed Troy's true extent and importance during the Late Bronze Age. The city was much larger than previously suspected, with a substantial lower town extending beyond the citadel walls. This discovery transformed understanding of Troy's significance. Archaeological evidence now supports the possibility of historical conflict at Troy during the 13th century BCE. Troy Severna shows clear signs of siege warfare and violent destruction. The timing coincides with the era when Mycenaean Greeks were expanding into Anatolia. Mycenaean pottery found in Troy's ruins confirms contact between Greeks and Trojans during the Late Bronze Age. These archaeological links support Homer's basic framework of Greek expedition against Troy. Some historical memory may underlie the legendary accounts. Hittite archives from Bogazkoi mention a city called Wilusa in the same geographical location as Troy. The name Wilusa may derive from the same root as Ilios, Homer's alternative name for the city. These documents place Troy within the political networks of its time. Evidence for Bronze Age warfare includes arrowheads embedded in walls, hastily buried storage jars, and signs of fire damage throughout the city. These archaeological traces paint a picture of a settlement under siege, matching Homer's descriptions remarkably well. However, the archaeological record cannot confirm specific details of Homer's narrative. No inscriptions mention heroes like Achilles or Hector. The scale of destruction visible at Troy Severna suggests local conflict rather than the massive international war described in the epics. The relationship between archaeological fact and literary legend remains complex and debated. Homer may have preserved genuine memories of Bronze Age warfare while transforming them through centuries of oral tradition. Historical kernels could have grown into mythic narratives. Modern archaeology has revealed the sophisticated civilization that flourished at Troy during the Late Bronze Age. The city controlled important trade routes and possessed advanced military architecture. Its strategic position made it worth fighting for. The search for Troy has illuminated the entire world of Bronze Age Anatolia and the Aegean. Excavations at Mycenae, Pylos, and other Greek sites have revealed the civilization that could have mounted expeditions like the one Homer describes. Scientific methods have allowed archaeologists to extract maximum information from limited evidence. Computer modeling, DNA analysis, and advanced dating techniques provide tools that earlier excavators lacked. Each generation of scholars adds to our understanding. The debate over Troy's historicity demonstrates how archaeology and literature can inform each other without requiring exact correspondence. Homer's poetic truth transcends historical accuracy, while archaeological discoveries illuminate the world that produced the legends. Future excavations may reveal additional evidence about Bronze Age Troy and its relationships with the Greek world. The site continues to yield new information about this crucial period in Mediterranean history. Archaeological investigation remains an ongoing process. The Trojan War's enduring appeal rests on its exploration of fundamental human experiences that transcend historical periods and cultural boundaries. Love and betrayal, honor and duty, the price of glory and the nature of mortality speak to every generation with undiminished power. Love serves as both the war's initial cause and its driving force throughout 10 years of conflict. Helen's beauty launched the expedition, but other forms of love sustained it. Achilles fought for love of honor, Hector for love of family, and Odysseus for love of home. The complexity of love's expression in wartime revealed its contradictory nature. The same emotion that inspired heroic courage also motivated destructive jealousy. Love could elevate human nature to divine heights, or reduce it to bestial savagery depending on circumstances. Betrayal followed inevitably from love's intensity and war's pressures. Personal loyalties conflicted with political necessities. Heroes faced impossible choices between competing obligations. The war demonstrated how extreme situations could corrupt even the noblest characters. Helen's apparent betrayal of her marriage vows created the moral ambiguity that runs throughout the entire story. Was she a willing adulteress or a victim of divine compulsion? The question remains unanswerable because human motivation defies simple categorization. Honor motivated every major character while meaning different things to each individual. Achilles pursued personal honor through military excellence. Hector sought family honor through protective duty. Agamemnon claimed royal honor through successful command. The conflict between different concepts of honor drove much of the story's dramatic tension. Personal honor opposed collective welfare repeatedly. Individual excellence threatened group unity. The war illustrated how noble ideals could produce destructive consequences. Duty provided another complex theme that influenced every character's decisions. Sons owed duty to fathers, wives to husbands, subjects to kings, and mortals to gods. These overlapping obligations created dilemmas that no one could resolve satisfactorily. Hector embodied the burden of duty most clearly through his role as Troy's primary defender. He had not chosen this war but could not abandon his responsibilities. His nobility lay in accepting fate while continuing to fight against overwhelming odds. The cost of war fell upon victors and vanquished alike with devastating equality. Greeks who survived Troy's destruction faced years of wandering and divine punishment. Trojans who died fighting for their homeland achieved heroic immortality through poets' songs. The war's aftermath revealed that victory's price often exceeded its value. Agamemnon's triumph led to his murder. Achilles' glory cost him life itself. Success in war did not guarantee happiness in peace. Divine intervention raised questions about human agency and moral responsibility that remain relevant today. If gods influenced human actions, could mortals be held accountable for their choices? The tension between fate and free will underlies every major episode. The heroes' awareness of their mortality paradoxically enabled their greatest achievements. Knowing that life was brief motivated them to seek lasting fame through memorable deeds. Death's certainty gave urgency to the pursuit of excellence. Achilles' choice between long life and eternal glory crystallized the heroic dilemma that every warrior faced. Most chose immediate pleasure over lasting reputation, but heroes chose differently. Their willingness to sacrifice quantity of life for quality of achievement defined heroic nature. The nature of mortality received its fullest exploration through the war's conclusion. Even the mightiest heroes proved vulnerable to fate's decrees. Death came to kings and commoners alike. Only memory preserved individual achievement beyond the grave. These eternal themes explain why the Trojan War continues to inspire new treatments in every generation. Each age finds fresh relevance in ancient stories. The fundamental questions raised by the war remain as pressing today as they were 3,000 years ago. Modern audiences recognize their own struggles in the hero's dilemmas. We still face conflicts between personal desires and social obligations. We still question whether honor justifies sacrifice. We still wonder about the meaning of mortality and the value of fame. The war's themes transcend cultural boundaries because they address universal aspects of human experience. Love, death, duty, and honor concern all people regardless of their historical circumstances. Great literature speaks to what remains constant in human nature. The winds that once filled Greek sails toward Troy still blow across the Aegean Sea. The ruins of that mighty citadel still crown the hill of Hisarlik, where archaeologists continue to uncover traces of the Bronze Age world that gave birth to legend. Yet the truest monument to Troy lies not in broken stones, but in the deathless verses that have carried its story across 3 millennia. Homer's song has echoed through countless generations of listeners who found their own struggles reflected in ancient heroes' triumphs and tragedies. Kings and peasants, warriors and poets, lovers and dreamers have all discovered wisdom in tales of love that launched 1,000 ships and honor that demanded the ultimate sacrifice. The Trojan War speaks to something eternal in human nature that transcends the boundaries of time and culture. We recognize ourselves in Achilles' rage, Hector's devotion, Helen's beauty, and Odysseus' cleverness. Their choices illuminate the moral complexities that we face in our own lives. Archaeological discoveries have revealed the historical world that produced these legends, but they have not diminished the story's power to move and instruct. Whether the war happened exactly as Homer described matters less than the truths his poetry reveals about courage and cowardice, love and hate, victory and defeat. Each generation finds new meanings in these ancient tales. Medieval poets transformed Greek heroes into Christian knights. Renaissance artists celebrated human dignity through classical subjects. Modern writers explore psychological depths that earlier ages had not recognized. The stories adapt to new interpretations while retaining their essential power. In this tale of gods and mortals, we find reflections of our own struggles with honor and duty, passion and consequence. The Trojan War reminds us that the grandest victories can carry the seeds of tragedy, that the mightiest heroes are also the most vulnerable to fate, and that the stories we tell about our conflicts often matter more than the conflicts themselves. The bronze weapons that once gleamed on Troy's plain have long since turned to rust. The walls that protected Priam's city have crumbled into foundation stones. The ships that carried heroes across wine-dark seas have rotted into forgotten dust. But the song that preserves their memory grows stronger with each telling. As you drift towards sleep, let these ancient voices fade gently into silence. Achilles with his terrible wrath, Hector with his noble devotion, Helen with her dangerous beauty, and Odysseus with his restless intelligence continue their eternal dance through human imagination. Their story, born beside the wine-dark sea, endures as long as people remember that love and loss, honor and betrayal, triumph and tragedy are the eternal themes that define our common humanity. The Trojan War lives on because it speaks to what is most enduring in the human heart. In every age, in every land, people have found themselves in these ancient stories. The song that began 3,000 years ago continues still, as immortal as the human longing for meaning that first gave it voice.